the opinion of various stakeholders that are concerned with this particular matter. And of course, in its consideration, the committee did look into various aspects, including and not limited to whether these particular rules are in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution, whether they infringe on fundamental rights and freedoms of the public, and whether they directly or indirectly bar the jurisdiction of the court. Yet another motion by the same committee on delegated legislation. It considered a report of the energy solar heating regulations of 2012, which were published on the 25th of May 2012 as a subsidiary legislation under the Energy Act number 12 of 2006. And this committee is also recommending that these particular regulations be annulled in their entirety. Also before the House, a report on the 49th session of the ACP Parliamentary Assembly and inter-sessional meetings of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly. This one took place in Brussels, Belgium, between the 20th and 22nd of the month of March. The leader of that delegation was Honorable Kato Olemetito. The ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly, created out of a common desire to bring together elected representatives of the European Community, members of the European Parliament, elected representatives of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific states, also known as ACP countries, all which have signed the Cotonou Agreement. And the Kenyan delegation, led by Honorable Kato Olemetito, a delegation of 8 individuals, did participate in a number of sessions, all geared towards achieving the various mandates of this ACP Parliamentary Assembly. A motion on the 138th Assembly of the Inter-parliamentary Union, IPU, and related meetings. These meetings took place between the 12th and 16th of March 2018 in United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. And this particular report will be presented by the chairperson, Committee on Members, Services and Facilities. And of course, just noting Kenya's input in this particular Inter-parliamentary Union, which facilitates discussions on parliamentary dialogue, cooperation, and action, and in which there are 178 member parliaments represented. And so they shall be telling the House just exactly what was achieved. A live broadcast brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in conjunction with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, a broadcast that you can also follow live via YouTube. There is a live stream there, and also on Signet, where we are available.
Let's proceed.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions.
Honorable Tobiko, member for Kajiado East.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I, the undersigned, on behalf of residents of Empash, Tuala, Rongai, and Olosirkon areas in Kajiado East constituency, draw the attention of the House to the following. One, that Article 40, subsection 3 of the Constitution of Kenya affords every Kenyan the right to own property and prohibits the state from depriving any person of their property without compensation, which should be prompt payment in full of just compensation to the person. 2, that Article 42 of the Constitution affords every person the right to a clean and healthy environment. 3, that under Section 111 and 120, subsection 1 of the Land Act 2012, the National Land Commission can only take formal possession of the affected lands after an award for compensation has been made to the amount paid in full to the affected persons. Number 4, that in early 2017, the government of Kenya, through the Kenya Railways Corporation, embarked on construction of the second phase of the standard gauge railway, project, which starts at the Nairobi Railway Terminal to Enos Rutia in Naivasha. Kenya Railways identified the Nairobi National Park and parcels of lands in Empash, Tuala, Rongai, and Olosirkon areas within Kajiado East constituency to be affected by the SGR Phase 2A. Number 5, that for this purpose, the government of Kenya commissioned an environmental and social impact assessment study on the proposed railway corridor in October 2016. The assessment required the Kenya Railways Corporation and the contractor to employ certain measures to ensure that the environmental and social impacts of this SGR Phase 2A projects are either mitigated or eliminated. Number 6, that some of the measures include the corporate social responsibility projects on roads, water, and other infrastructure projects. Number 7, that despite having not formally served upon the affected landowners with necessary legal notices and therefore without compensation, the Kenya Railways Corporation, in association with the China Communications Construction Company, the National Land Commission, and the local provincial administration, through a number of uncoordinated public gatherings, intimidated the landowners and other project-affected persons to relocate and allow what they then termed as early entry to the affected areas for urgent purpose of construction of the SGR Phase 2A, on the understanding that the National Land Commission will fast-track their compensation. Number 8, that in order to gain early entry, the Kenya Railways Corporation and the Chinese company promised the residents of these areas that public utilities like electricity and water will not be by the construction. That in some instances where the landowners refused to allow access to the company gained entry by force with assistance of the Kenya Police Service officers deployed to protect the project company. Number 10, that consequently the houses, farms, businesses, and homes of affected persons were demolished to allow for early access by the company, despite not affording the owners of those parcels an opportunity to look for alternative land to settle. That the construction of the SGR Phase 2A began in early 2017 in earnest, and the project is now reportedly 70 to 80% complete and is due to be commissioned on the 1st of June 2019 with a first train ride to Naivasha. That on the 22nd December 2017, the National Land Commission published in the Kenya Gazette a notice of intention to acquire land, clearly stating the names and parcels number of the lands which will be compulsorily acquired to pave way for SGR Phase 2A. That on the 2nd May 2018, the National Land Commission published a notice of inquiry in the Kenya Gazette for the purposes of carrying out validation of claims by affected persons, determination of their compensation, and presenting of awards to the affected persons. That the inquiries were conducted by the National Land Commission on the scheduled dates and time, and majority, if not all, of the affected persons accepted the awards, despite them having been patently undervalued. That to date, no project affected person has been paid by the National Land Commission as promised, and the affected persons continue to suffer due to relocation. Yes, I know that. Just one moment. That it has been reported to the Ministry of Lands and Physical Planning has commissioned an exercise to re-evaluation or validation of awards issued by the National Land Commission, despite there not being any physical structures on the lands for valuation. That
to take a holistic approach to this matter of land compensation, specifically by the National Land Commission. Mr. Speaker, my view is that this commission has a problem, as a bigger structural problem that needs to be cured in one way or another. Because if things remain the way they are, this country is going to land into serious problems, more so when it comes to matters of property rights. So, Speaker, you find that this commission is very quick in regularizing and making payments for lands whose ownership is in doubt, but too slow or totally unable to compensate rightful owners of land that is acquired by the acquiring agencies such as KERA, KURA, KENHA, and now SGR. I support, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honorable Mwadime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supporting the petition from Kajiado, SGR, in fact, I'm requesting members where SGR is going to pass through, because already I have the experience when it was in our county there. Environmental assessment impact, it was not done well. For example, if you go towards Mombasa, between Makinan Road up to Manyani, you could see they have just built sand dunes, whereby we are having a big problem. Even the man-eater lions, they have come back simply because animals cannot traverse through from Savo West to Savo East. In fact, even the other day, they are mauling all my dairy cattle on top of the hills there. Alongside that, also non-payment of some of our residents. Even National Land Commission, road between Voi and Taveta, there are some of my constituents who have not yet been paid. But all the same, we should not be complaining on Swazuri all the time. You know very well promulgation started 2013. We should give these officers time and of course redirect them so that these officers can start working very well. Because we have many commissions and all of them, we can see they have problems. But all of us, we have just only dedicated and focused on Swazuri. We should look also other constitutions. Otherwise, to me, Swazuri has really tried. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Let's have Honorable Iringo, you want to speak to this one? Honorable Iringo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving this opportunity to comment on the petition. Mr. Speaker, the petition has got a lot of issues which has been raised by the petitioners. And Mr. Speaker, I would put it that in as much as we like development and we are ready to have these infrastructure developments in our country, the planners and the people who are supposed to do the survey and everything should put into consideration people's property and the people who own these pieces of land, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the problem we have in this country is poor planning, whereas we have got officers who are on the ground who should do the proper planning so that when we try to develop some areas of our country, we don't affect other people's properties, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the railway is being laid down, the contractor must have put into consideration even compensation to the people who are affected, and therefore it should not take ages to compensate the people who have and their property destroyed or who have been misplaced, Mr. Speaker. Before they start even excavating that land, they should have seen that those people who have been living in those particular pieces of land, either farming there or sleeping there, they are compensated first, well settled, before the works start on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the problems we have in this country, even the demolition of properties even here in Nairobi and elsewhere, which are going on, it is because of poor planning, and those officers who have been doing this, who have been certifying this land or these pieces of properties to be constructed upon, Mr. Speaker, should be held culpable, because they are the ones who are the ones who have caused all these problems. Once the houses are being brought down, even the people who have been issuing licenses or vetting the putting up of properties should also be held responsible and surcharged for having allocated land which was not supposed to be put up and building or something else. Mr. Speaker, I support the petition, and it is well presented. Thank you.
Lastly, on this one, Honorable Nakuleu, if you want to speak to this particular one. You want to speak to this one, Honorable Nakuleu?
Honorable Speaker, I had an intention of rising on a point of order on a different issue, which appeared on one of the Gata press.
If it's a different issue, please,
yes.
You just approach the matter in the normal manner. I just wanted those ones who will comment on this. So it means you do not want to comment on that one. So we'll move to the next order.
Order number 5, papers.
Party.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Tuesday, August 14th, 2018. The report of the Auditor General and financial statements in respect of the following institutions for the year that ended 30th June 2017 and the certificate therein. National Government Affirmative Action Fund, Water Sector Trust Fund, Rural Electrification Authority, Water Service Regulatory Board, WASREP, Athi Water Service Board, National Environment Trust Fund, Kenya Academy of Sports, and finally, Technical University of Kenya. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. So we go to the next one, that is a chairperson, Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works and Housing.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Thursday, August 9th, 2018. Reports of the Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works and Housing on its consideration of 1. The petition regarding the construction of footbridges, crossings along Outer Ring Road in Nairobi. Number 2, the petition under Article 26, Sub-Article 1, and Article 35 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and the Traffic Act 2012 with regard to Kenya traffic road accidents. And finally, 3, Speaker, the petition on alleged impending demolition of building along Mtangawanda Kisingitini Road. Honorable Speaker, I thank you.
Okay. We'll go to the next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion.
Honorable Limo.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that pursuant to the provisions of Section 13 of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, relating to the extension of period for consideration of nominees for appointment to a public office, this House resolves to extend the period for consideration of the nominees submitted by His Excellency the President for the appointment to the Salaries and Remuneration Commission by a further period of 14 days from 21st August 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. So we'll go to the next order.
Order number 7, statements.
Honorable Mogaka, I think there was something I approved. Proceed.
Yes,
Proceed.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. It is with a heavy heart that I regret to announce the death of Honorable Henry Obocha, who was a distinguished Kenyan, which took place on Friday, 3rd August 2018. The Right Honorable Henry Obocha was, until his death, the chair of Privatization Commission of Kenya, former Minister for Planning and National Development, an Assistant Minister for Finance, former Member of Parliament for West Mogran constituency, who served for 3 terms from the year 1992 to the year 2007. Honorable Obocha was also former acting Minister of Energy from April to November 2006, and he was also a member of the National Economic and Social Council of Kenya. He was also a member which drafted Kenya's Vision 2030. Honorable Speaker, the Right Obocha was a founder member of KCA University, the formerly Kenya College of Accountants, and had previously served as a member of IPPG and also chair Parliamentary Accounts Committee. Notably, Mr. Speaker, it is the Right Obocha, together with other members of this House in the previous parliaments, who visited various countries to study the existence and operation of committee systems, and when they came back, prepared a report which saw the formation of current and existing departmental committees of this House. Mr. Speaker, the late Obocha has also been involved in the management of various meetings, various companies, and also in the Treasury. Mr. Honorable Obocha led Kenyan delegations to various international meetings and conferences. Honorable Speaker, I wish to know that Honorable Obocha has left a legacy of a generous, hardworking, strong believer in education, and above all, a humble man who always gave a helping hand to all. He will always be remembered for his development record, more particularly in West Mogran constituency, the greater Kisii community, and Kenya at large. Honorable Speaker, on behalf of the people of West Mogrango and on my own behalf, I take this opportunity to convey my sincere condolences to the family, relatives, and friends of the departed Honorable Obocha. I express my gratitude at the selfless service he rendered to the people of the great constituents of West Mogrango and Kenyans at large. May God rest his soul in eternal peace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, on this particular one, I'll give a few members. I'll obviously at one point identify a member from the Ford Kenya party, which originally Honorable Obuocha was, and probably I'll start with the Secretary General of Ford Kenya, really, because that was the original party of. I'll also look out for members who served with him in the 9th Parliament and before. I will also look out at neighbors, and that will be it. So we'll have, if you are brief, we'll be able to give more.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this chance to also add my voice to pass my condolences to the family of the late Obuocha on my own behalf and on behalf of the party Ford Kenya, which I'm the Secretary General, a party which Obuocha served as the organizing secretary for the time that he was in Parliament. Indeed, it's Honorable Obuocha who actually took Ford Kenya into Kisiland, where it still exists up to today, as you've heard the member who has just read the condolence message, and the deputy party leader, who is Honorable Nyonka, all coming from Kisii. Indeed, Obuocha's contribution to the fight for opened up democratic space will forever be remembered. And in fact, this Parliament, all of us who are enjoying our various positions in various committees should remember that this Parliament only had 2 committees, which was PIC and PAC, until the time that Obuocha and his colleagues went around the world and came back and proposed that we have departmental committees. So he has left a legacy that this Parliament should always remember him for, and the nation should remember him for what he has done for us. And so lastly, Mr. Speaker, I recall that the Honorable Obuocha, even in his retirement from active politics, has been actually involved in the activities of our PACOSO, parliamentary circle, mainly as the auditor, and he has always been reappointed year in, year out. So he's somebody who has served diligently, and we really have heartfelt condolences to the family and the people of West Mogirango. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well, Honorable Momanyi Orori, member for Barabu.
Thank you.
I am picking members who are placed interventions, so I'm able to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity also to extend my sincere condolences to the family of the Honorable Henry Obuocha, the people of West Mogirango, Nyamira, both Nyamira and Kisii, and the nation in general. Mr. Speaker, the time Obuocha was a member of this House, he was one person, Mr. Speaker, that we could always admire when debating in these chambers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Obuocha comes from the neighboring constituency. He's a person, Mr. Speaker, that people really admired across the board, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Honorable Obuocha was such a very strong man. He was a very brave person, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I remember one time when nobody could dare to tell His Excellency His Excellency, the former President Moi, no to anything. Obuocha stood one time in a public meeting and told the former president no when he was requesting that he crosses to Kano, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you've heard from the 2 speakers, the former minister, Mr. Speaker, contributed greatly to this nation, Mr. Speaker. We, as a team, Mr. Speaker, we need to remind the other Kenyans that, Mr. Speaker, those who have served in this House need to be respected. We should also, Mr. Speaker, as Honorable Kemosi, who is the Member of Parliament for West Mogirango, has requested that this evening, Mr. Speaker, we all walk to 680, Mr. Speaker, so that we're able to contribute generously, so that at the end of the day, we give Honorable Obuocha the send-off that he deserves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, just 2 things before I still give a few more members, maybe 2 or 3. Let me first, on the matter of Honorable Tobiko, the petition, I did not refer it to a committee, so I proceed to refer it to the relevant committee, which is the Committee on Transport, and I see the chairman is in the House. And also let me recognize in the public gallery students and pupils from Our Lady of Peace Primary School, Nandi Hills in Nandi County, Pesia Bay Primary School from Konoin constituency of Bomet County, New Star Day Care Academy from Likoni, Mombasa County, St. Pius Uriri Boys High School from Uriri constituency of Migori County, and Eldoret Achievers Primary School from Kapseret constituency of Uasin Gishu County. And on the speakers gallery, we have Kapsabet Boys High Primary School from Mgwen constituency of Nandi County, and Simbolei Junior Academy, Keyo North constituency of Elgeyo Marakwet County. Okay, let's proceed. I am trying to look out for members already. I see there's a lot of interest, and it can be understood. So from the Honorable Kimunya, of course, they actually served in cabinet with the late Honorable Bocha. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to convey my personal as well as on behalf of the many accountants who I had the opportunity to lead, including the Honorable Badi and others who are in this house, to convey heartfelt condolences on the passing of one of our own, Honorable Obocha, who I had the honor of serving in government with. I had the opportunity of serving with him within the National Economic and Social Council, which I chaired, and I know he was a major contributor as we developed the national planning framework, which came to be known as the National Vision 2030. And he's a fine gentleman, and I've known him for many years, from the time he served in the Pirathron Board, to the time he came to Parliament, from the time he served within West Mugirango. And I would only say that we was off as a nation with the passage of such a fine gentleman, and I do hope that the people of West Mugirango and his family will be consoled in the knowledge that he's left his legacy.
Yes, proceed. I can see there is an interruption. You still have the mic, Honorable Kimunya. Now let's wait for it to, because I'm having a problem citing you. You are, many of you in...
Yes, I think there was a technical failure, but I was saying, Mr. Speaker, that I do believe the people of West Mugirango and his family and his friends have lost a fine gentleman who's made a fine contribution to the development of this country, to the development of the accountancy profession, to the development of professionalism in general, and we do hope that many more will emulate his, the things he stood for, the virtues he stood for, the values he stood for, and that going forward, his contribution in this house will be immortalized forever, because the good thing with history, it's there, and nobody can erase what you've done. But we lost such a fine gentleman, and I believe the people, let's all stand together and support so that we can give him a decent send-off. But most importantly, let's aspire to learn from some of these fine gentlemen who've lived this world and have gone before us and have left a mark within the history of this house. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I want to thank the member for West Mugirango for raising this matter in the House.
Okay, honorable members, I can't cite any other person who has specific interest on this one. Honorable Leader of Minority.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to just make a few comments with regards to the late Honorable Bocha. First, my sincere sympathies and condolences to the family, friends, the people he represented, and Kenyans at large, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Bocha, even those of us who didn't serve with him because he served in the 7th, 8th, 9th Parliament, I came in the 10th Parliament, but I think his contribution in this Republic and this Parliament was admirable. As a cabinet minister, I also served diligently, but I think members will also remember that he was our auditor in the parliamentary circle, and he did his duty diligently. And as a professional colleague, I want to say that the accounting profession has lost a brain, has lost manpower, and I just want to say fare thee well to him. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We'll go to the next order, but before then, I see, what is it, Honorable Nakuleu? What is it? What is out of order?
Honorable Speaker, there's nothing out of order. I had placed the intervention awaiting for that session to raise the relevant issue.
You said you are waiting for?
On the gutter, Honorable Speaker, I rise to get your indulgence on the matter that has been circulating in the social media for the last 2 days. Honorable Speaker, a lot of information which is...
Order, members, let's listen to it because we had finalized the issue of Honorable Obuocha. So it is an issue which he's raising. I want to see where it can be placed because I really want... I've heard you speak about social media, but proceed.
Yes, Honorable Speaker, there is a lot of defamatory information about members of parliament who are purported to have received 10,000 shillings last Thursday. Honorable Speaker, it is indeed very unfortunate that somebody can sit somewhere and generate a list of members with serious malice. Most of the members whose names are appearing in the list were not there last week. Members, for example, from county of Turkana, all of them were in Turkana because the deputy president had visited that county. And all of us were not there. Some members who are in the list are also outside the country when the purported bribery is thought to have claimed, and they have not come back. Members from West Pokot, the likes of Lumunokol, Matt, Moroto is outside. Some are in hospitals admitted. We now feel that we need the protection of the leadership of this House.
As I continue to keenly follow what you are saying, I hope we are also able to prove that it was not sent by Western Union. But proceed anyway.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
So what is it that you want? What is it that you want, Honorable Nakuleu?
Honorable Speaker, since the matter, this information ought to have been generated from this House by media having access to the information of this House. And most members whose names have been listed are not aware of the transactions that have been purported to have been done. So, Honorable Speaker, it's a serious malice, and the leadership of this House must give the correct position and protect the dignity of members of parliament.
Now, well, of course, I've heard you, and you know you are not raising on, you do not want to give a personal statement. You've placed you know, an intervention, and you are proceeded. And I listen to you keenly because, of course, I do understand that the issue of sugar and the allegation of bribery is an extremely grave concern to Kenyans and obviously to members of this House.
Yes.
But you see, I'm struggling to see what I should do. One, you know, I realize even the members themselves are throwing names left and right. It's difficult for me to be of use at this particular point in time, because it is true, some members, and I do not know which one you are talking about. If you mentioned the few you have mentioned, they are out of the country. If there's an allegation against them, it probably is not true at all. But my hands are fairly tied. But maybe also members should not be very helpful to the media in trying to generate news for the media itself. Let the media look out for news. Do not help them as members. And there are avenues. If you have issues, there are avenues. If you have been mentioned personally, and maybe by a colleague, you know there are avenues which you can approach. Even the local mechanisms that we have as an assembly. So really, let's not also react. You are a senior member of this House. Don't react to everything that is everywhere. You know, social media, those things that really you did not do should not offend you at all. Some of the things you can actually ignore. I met a member who says he was in Uganda, and he was wondering whether he was paid in Kenya shillings or in Uganda shillings. The honorable member for Kuresoi North also, I met him personally, and he was not sure. He was asking whether it was in dollars or in Kenya shillings because, you know, those kind of things. So, honorable members, let us not react to everything. And we can do very well by us members keeping off some of these kind of things. So, of course, I sympathize a great deal with your position and the members from Turkana, because it is beyond reasonable. I mean, we are actually sure you are not in the House yourselves, but there is nothing much because it is not, I do not know who generated the list at all. So probably you should be comfortable that what you did not do should not harm you at all. And some of these things we can leave to the conscience. Honorable Omenen, what is it again? I can see the member for Turkana has already spoken on this. Is it the same thing?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious issue because in this digital world, any information that's spread threatens our re-election, Mr. Speaker. Our re-election, our role has been threatened. So the reasons why we are raising this issue, because we are protected by this House. Anything that is done in this House, Mr. Speaker, is recorded. Those members who are there on Thursdays, whether they were bribed or not, the first thing that is supposed to be done is to produce that list to correct the gutter press.
Which list now?
The list of members who attended, who are in the motion. Mr. Speaker. Yeah, who are in the House that time. It is not a sin, Mr. Speaker, to produce a list of those members who are there.
Now, are you suggesting that all the members who are there, therefore, received?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, just a minute.
Order, Honorable
Mr. Speaker,
order.
Before we ask that.
Order. Now, before I give you back the mic, before I give you the mic again, Honorable Omenen, though I see you probably had exhausted, really, as far as we are concerned, on that day, the vote that was done was on acclamation. It would be very difficult to know who voted one way or the other. And it's perfectly in order for any member to vote whatever, and make whatever decision, even those who went on record. You know, it is not for us to impute that members who probably supported were paid, or the ones who are not supporting were paid. It's not really up to us. And then again, let's not give credence to things which are not probably credible at all. So let's leave it at that. You have said it, and you said you are not in the House. That should be enough. Really, we shouldn't go beyond there. Yes, and honorable members, let's you know, and if there are members, for example, if there are members at all, or even if the press is sure about what they are alleging, they are free to produce evidence, and of course, the rest will follow. We have our own privileges committee. They can approach any other agency to resolve that particular issue. So let's not give too much time to that one. Maybe let me give Honorable Wamunyinyi first, and I hope it is on the same thing, and then we'll finalize it, maybe by giving another extra member, and that will be it. But if it is something else, I hope you proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is not a different matter, but it's fairly different, but because it's in the interest of the Kenyan people, the people we represent, the sugarcane farmers, the Kenyan public taking poisoned sugar, and all of us are affected, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the accusations that have been made against leaders of this House, the leader of majority, the leader of majority on this side, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I would like to raise this issue, Mr. Speaker, based on our standing orders. Mr. Speaker, we all understand and appreciate the procedure that we cannot revisit a matter but there is a window, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to seek your permission in accordance with our standing order number 49.
Well, let me stop you there. Let me stop you there first.
Mr. Speaker, and I'll give reasons.
No, just a minute. I do understand that particular bit you are talking about, which is about rescinding
yes, Mr. Speaker.
Any decision that has been made.
Yes.
But you see, you are a very senior member yourself. In fact, one of the most senior members here. You know how you approach that particular matter. Number one, you need to put it in writing for the Speaker's approval. At this point, it is not.
Mr. Speaker,
it cannot be.
At this point, I have done that, and it's on your desk, Mr. Speaker. Just to seek your permission to urge the House to rescind the decision that was taken last week, Mr. Speaker. But again, I would like us to understand, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious matter, Mr. Speaker, and I would like you to give me time to express myself.
Now, Honorable Amunyinyi.
Mr. Speaker, I want to draw your attention to the Constitution of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, Article 73, Mr. Speaker, of the Constitution, sub-article 2B. Mr. Speaker, the objectivity and impartiality in decision-making and in ensuring that decisions are not influenced by nepotism, favorism, other improper motives, or corrupt practices is provided in the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, and it is clear that there has been bribery here. Mr. Speaker, if you move on to Article 95 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, Article 95 says, sub-article 2 in particular, the National Assembly deliberates and resolves issues of concern to the people of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, this issue has not been resolved. The issue of sugar importation has not been resolved.
Okay. What is it, Honorable Member for Nyeri?
Mr. Speaker, I'm on a point of order.
No, just a minute, Honorable Amunyinyi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I raise on a point of order because I'm wondering whether Honorable Amunyinyi realizes that the line of argument he's taking is basically taking a position to confirm. You are playing to the media. You are actually taking a line that seeks to confirm. Can I finish? Can I finish? It is important.
Now, other members, let's listen to each member. Let's listen to each member. Each member has a voice in this house. So let's listen to what Honorable Ambugo has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am making a point, and my point is this. I have listened to some members of parliament. There are lists going around, and I'm not on that list. So the point I want to make is that when a member of parliament stands in this house and argues that there was undue influence used in the decision that was made on that report, you are actually confirming the reports that are out there that members of parliament were paid. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. You have been heard. And honorable members, no. Hold on, Honorable Amunyinyi. Hold on, Honorable Amunyinyi. I gave you the floor. The only thing is when you made, no, other members, when you make such allegations, no, don't. I'm not giving you the floor. I'm telling you what the ruling I'm making. You have stated that you have already put it in writing, and it is with the Speaker. Now, that is a document I am willing to see. Number two, the allegations you've made, that you are sure that there are members who have been bribed. I cannot say it is true or it is not true, but you have avenues. Just hold on, Honorable Amunyinyi. Now, that is an issue that if you have good evidence, we have avenues that we can deal with. We have the Privileges Committee, which you can bring the evidence. No. What I will not allow, Honorable Amunyinyi, is for you to make a sweeping statement without any substantiation. Now, I'll give you an opportunity. I'll give you an opportunity to substantiate with facts and evidence. Now, it is not a question of you throwing one word against the other. So I'm not going to give you an opportunity to proceed. I will expect to get some evidence from you, which we will refer to the relevant committee, the mechanisms that we have in this House, and then we'll proceed on that one. So I'm giving another member on a point of order. That is Honorable... No. Honorable members, let us be fair to each other. We can only make allegations which we can substantiate. Now, so you have read the Constitution, and I've heard you.
What I said is in the Constitution.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
I'm not the one who
so what you have said, and which I accept, is that you have put it in writing. So you will be given an opportunity once the document has been seen, and you'll be just like every other member. But what you have done here is to ambush, which I have given you some minutes on it, and I mean, you have made your allegations. So there are a few things now that you need to, because initially you had come in very well under Article 49 of our standing orders, that you wanted the matter to be rescinded. You know the procedure. I know you know the procedure. Now, you have gone ahead to make an allegation, which of course, okay, then I will, in that case, that is fine. I will look at the Hansard. If you did not make allegations, of course, you will have an opportunity again to speak to this tomorrow. But if you made the allegations, then proceed, please, and substantiate. Because you probably will, and don't tell me about newspapers, don't tell me about those kind of things. Just be fair, say so-and-so was given money, and there you are able to prove, that would be fine. In fact, you don't even need to come to the Speaker. You can approach the committee directly. It is okay. We will have I have made an order to see the Hansard. Now, that should not be so difficult for you. You'll have an opportunity to proceed with that. No. That will not be right. And I expect you to be a bit more, if it is you, Honorable Amunyinyi, I would expect it from somebody else. Maybe, not you. I know you are a senior member. I have said I am calling for the Hansard. If you do not make any allegation, you will have an opportunity again. You will canvass your position. But if you made the allegations, we will have to dispose fast with the issue which you have indicated. And it is straightforward, Honorable Amunyinyi. And I know, for example, that you are speaking very seriously for your constituents, which is right. It is a perfect right of every member here. But you see, you have been hurt. I'm sure the members of Nzoia and those ones who supply sugar to Nzoia have heard you. So now, and of course, Honorable Omenen has been heard by his constituents that he actually was not in the House. Honorable Nakuleo has been heard that he was also not in the House. Now, the rest, really, we do not go to all those details. So, honorable members, let us be fair. Let us be fair. Let's follow our standing orders. We will proceed in a good manner. Let's not, unnecessarily get excited about this. This is a matter that was canvassed and transacted on that particular day. It was voted one way or the other. Now, the substantive speaker actually commented on this. He said he will make sure that this thing is investigated. He has even asked that other agencies can participate in this. You, as members, remember even in the last parliament, you are given an opportunity to create a committee on standards, similar to the one in the House of Commons in the UK. You threw it away. Now, how do you expect the speaker seated here to start accepting that so-and-so picked this or so-and-so did not pick it? You can see already the members. So I will give a few members. The rest of it, we can have another day. You will have an opportunity, Honorable Amunyinyi, and I can see you are nodding, but please, let us not throw, let's not throw allegations left and right. And whoever has that opportunity, whoever has details, come with it. We will be more than happy, to act on them. And we've acted before. We have acted before. We acted on the issue, remember the one where members were mentioning each other left and right? That's Honorable Ababu's case previously. We have done that. This House will rise to the occasion, but you do not make allegations. So I think I am going to rule that that is not a matter we need to proceed on now. We'll proceed to other things and then wait for Honorable Amunyinyi's case, and then we'll proceed. Okay. So next order. Honorable members, you'll have an opportunity tomorrow or a day after.
Order number 8, the Circle Societies Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 1 of 2018, second reading.
Party, are you going to be speaking on that one?
Hello, Honorable Speaker, the SACCO, I get your indulgence that we step down the SACCO Society Bill because I think the committee is yet to bring the report. And once we do that, Chair, I'm being told that it has been moved. I'm not aware. I'm the owner of the bill. It has not been moved. It has not been moved, and I really want to let me speak. I'm the owner of the bill. Anybody else purporting to have a contrary view is masquerading. So we have not, and I think in the order paper it's written second reading. It's not a continuation. And because I have checked with the clerk's office that the report is not there already of the committee, once that report is tabled and the chair is ready to second, we can do it tomorrow or the day after. No, it's a different.
Now, I thought number one, let's accept that the leader of majority is the one who owns that particular bill. Now, but the chair of the committee is here, and I thought he actually tabled the report. But the leader of majority is perfectly in order. I mean, we have other businesses in the House. If you really think we should step it down, we should obviously not have a problem with that one. Yes? What is it, leader?
Chair, I think I'll brief the House Business Committee this evening because my whip and the chair are saying that this item was moved. So we will check and report to the House tonight, House Business Committee, the whip is there, and then we'll brief you.
Now, just to confirm, so that for future reference, was the report moved or not, so that we know at what point to start, when we resume. Honorable Kanini.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am not aware that it was moved because I didn't second it. I think we were busy with the sugar issues, and I think we need to check with the Hansard to see what actually happened. Because if it was moved, then it was Thursday after the sugar issue. Then Mr. Speaker, then we will do the internal consultation.
Okay, because looking at it, on this particular Honorable Mboko Milemba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, you can see even the order of the House business is not moving clearly. And this is courtesy of the residue effect of the sugar, the poisonous sugar. So also, I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the integrity of the House is at stake. And it will be important that at one point in time...
You do not have the mic. You do not have the mic. You do not have the mic on that one. Honorable Mboko Milemba, I gave you an opportunity on this particular one, and you have mentioned that bit. You have said the problem is probably... I will not mention that, but that is a matter that has been dealt with. We have stepped it down. We have stepped it down. So we'll proceed. We'll proceed. We'll proceed. Now there is confirmation that the report was not. If the report was tabled, the matter was not moved. So let's proceed. Next order.
Order number 9, motion. Report on consideration of the traffic, driving schools, driving instructors, and driving licenses rule 2018.
Okay, Honorable Chair. What is it again? What has the Chief Whip done?
You see, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this is a house of traditions, procedures, and laws, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot of indiscipline I'm seeing here, Mr. Speaker, especially on some first-time members of Parliament here, Mr. Speaker. This is not the markets they were operating in the villages, Mr. Speaker. This is a very serious house, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we can't allow this house to move on like this, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
I actually agree with you on this particular one, but proceed, Honorable Gladys Sholei.
Honorable Speaker, sir, I beg to move that the House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation laid on the table of this House on Thursday, August 2nd, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 15(1) of the Statutory Instruments Act and Standing Order 210-4B to annul in its entirety the traffic, driving schools, driving instructors, and driving licenses rules 2018. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Select Committee on Delegated Legislation is established pursuant to the Standing Order 2010 and has the power to scrutinize all statutory instruments submitted to the House. The committee is mandated to ensure that all regulations comply with the Constitution of Kenya and all other applicable laws. Mr. Speaker, sir, in exercise of the powers conferred under the Traffic Act, Cap 403, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development published the Traffic, Driving Schools, Driving Instructors and Driving Licenses Rules 2018 on the 26th of April 2018 via legal notice number 81 of 2018. Following the publication of the rules, they were tabled before this House on 13th June 2018 and immediately committed to the Select Committee on Delegated Legislation for scrutiny. Honorable Speaker, sir, prior to the publication of the rules, the regulation-making authority, in this case being NTSA, and that is the body that mandated to operationalize the rules, presented the draft rules in a workshop held on 20th April to the Committee on Delegated Legislation. This was a joint workshop between the NTSA, the National Transport and Safety Authority, and the National Assembly's Committee on Delegated Legislation, together with the Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works and Housing. Mr. Speaker, sir, the members of both committees during the consultations proposed to the National Transport and Safety Authority on the actions it should take to ensure conformity with the relevant requirements of the Constitution. The members were particularly concerned with that the regulations should be in line as stipulated in Article 2, Article 10, Article 94, and Article 118 of the Constitution, which I shall explain shortly. And also as read with the Traffic Act and the National Transport Authority Act, and also the Interpretation and General Provisions Act. Mr. Speaker, sir, NTSA, on its part, undertook after that consultation to realign the draft rules with the stated provisions of the Constitution and the relevant statutes prior to publishing those rules, and then subsequently tabling them before Parliament. It, however, to our shock, failed, ignored, and refused to incorporate any of the concerns that were raised by the two committees and proceeded to publish the rules on 26th of April 2018 via legal notice number 81, 2018. This is a mistake that many ministries and regulatory making authorities do make. However, unfortunately for them, this committee is extremely diligent. Mr. Speaker, sir, I know that the regulatory making authority took great exception when the committee annulled the regulations. And however, Mr. Speaker, sir, we shall explain briefly the reasons upon which this nullification happened, and I'm sure that members in the House will agree with us. Honorable Speaker, having considered the rules pursuant to the provisions of articles of the Constitution and the Traffic Act, and even its own National Transport and Safety Authority Act, the regulating making authority published the rules, and the two committees observed as follows. Rule number 4 that deals with acreage. This particular rule proposed that each driving school must have 1.6 acres of land for Category A and Category B license, and 1 acre for Category C. This was considered by the committee to be prohibitive and a contravention of the Traffic Act, which is the parent statute, which has no such requirements. The Statutory Instruments Act requires that the regulations made by the regulation making authority cannot exceed those that are made by the parent statute. There was also another rule, Rule 5, Honorable Speaker, which required that all driving schools renew their licenses every 2 years. The committee deliberated this and found that it's an added bureaucracy that would be punitive to those operating driving schools within our country. Rule number 7, which proposed random inspection by inspectors under this authority. It proposed that, that for the purpose of determining the suitability of a proposed school, the inspectors from NTSA would make random checks or inspection to the driving school and ensure that the driving school, and this is interesting, must have television projectors, computers, video players, digital video disc players, and so on. This, the committee felt, was considered prohibitive and needed to be reviewed. Even most of our schools, our secondary schools and our universities do not have that equipment. To expect that a driving school would have that equipment is simply ensuring that they go out of business. And in any case, if we want our country to be one that is rated highly for ease of doing business, creating extra layers of bureaucracy is not good for the business environment. Rule number 8 requires that school managers to have a minimum qualification of a certificate of education. The committee observed that this provision was not only ambiguous, but bordered on absurdity. It presupposes that every teacher who is trained as a teacher can teach driving. And I will use the example of Honorable Kogo, MP for Chesumei constituency, who I know taught at Wasingishu Secondary School in Eldoret. He is a major in mathematics and economy and a teacher par excellence. But I know he cannot possibly teach driving at all in a driving school. Rule number 12 allows inspectors to enter the driving school premises during regular hours at any time, that is to quote them. The committee observed that the inspection at any time is not only arbitrary, search of property and infringing on Article 31 of the Constitution, but also the right to privacy. Rule number 16 provides that for continuous development of driving instructors. The committee also observed, after long deliberations, that the proposal of instructors to undergo a minimum number of continuous development courses is punitive, since the presumption is that the more they teach or the more they drive, the better they advance their ability and their competencies in their trade. A driver of 10, all of us know that a driver of 10 years old is definitely, 10 years standing is definitely better than one of 2 years standing. Honorable Speaker, sir, rule number 24, read together with the third schedule in those proposed regulations, was found by the committee to be unconstitutional because it allows a child of 16 years old to be able to get a driving license. Honorable Speaker, that would be tantamount to amending the Constitution by reducing the age of majority as set out in our laws. Rule number 24, read together with the third schedule also, required that citizens above the age of 65 years were to repeat their driving test every 10 years. Again, this is punitive, and I know many members in this House would have to repeat the tests right now as we speak. Rule number 25, on the validity of licenses, here it also required that for certain licenses, one will have to repeat the driving examination every 3 years. The committee observed that this provision was frivolous and unnecessary, because it is obvious that the more one drives, the better they get at the skill. Rule number 25 also required that people or persons of the age 70 and above should not only renew their licenses every year, but also go for a medical examination every year. Rule number 26, fails because it has defective drafting. It uses the words may and shall interchangeably, which does not make sense in legislative drafting and causes ambiguity. And finally, the committee also observed that the last regulation that I'm referring to required that there has to be a minimum literacy level for you to be a driver. And this, again, would put many of our competent drivers off the road. And so, in conclusion, Honorable Speaker, sir, the committee therefore states that the said rules, pursuant to the provisions of the Constitution, the Traffic Act, the Statutory Instruments Act, the National Transport Safety and Statutory Authority Act, Safety Authority Act, and the Interpretation and General Provisions Act, which regulate the making, scrutiny, and publication of the rules, and having conferred with the regulation-making authority, the committee recommends that the traffic, driving schools, driving instructors, and driving licenses rules 2018 be annulled in its entirety for the aforementioned reasons that I have been able to explain. And as I conclude, Honorable Speaker, sir, I would like to thank members of my committee and the Secretariat who have so diligently worked on ensuring that this report is as is. And Honorable Speaker, as I beg to move, I request Honorable Daniel Maanzo, MP for Makueni constituency, and my claim to fame because he was my student, who is also a member of my committee, to second this report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Maanzo. Okay, proceed. But it
Thank you,
surprises me
Speaker.
that you are a student of...
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I rise to second the motion. Mr. Speaker, I would like to state that there is no way any delegated legislation or subsidiary legislation, Mr. Speaker, could be, one, against the Constitution, two, against a statute, and especially the parent statute, and three, could also be against consultations with the two House committees dealing with particular matter. For Mr. Speaker, it is important when regulations are being made, we avoid the mischief of regulatory bodies sneaking behind the laws and sneaking behind the advice of Parliament to make laws to serve, purporting to serve Kenyans. And for that matter, even some of the statutes, Mr. Speaker, like the NTSA Act, Mr. Speaker, should even be reviewed and checked to see whether it was properly done also within the law and whether there are flaws which are causing the people who are managing under NTSA to be able not to follow simple rules, not to follow the law by themselves, and subsequently make regulations definitely which will make a lot of confusion to Kenyans and through legislation. I therefore urge this House to support the committee as has been explained by our very able chair, the Honorable Sholei, such that we can be able to safeguard Kenyans and make sure the regulations which are made in this country are to serve the people, are made for the people, but not the other way around, Mr. Speaker. I therefore beg to second, Mr. Speaker.
And I propose a question, which is that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation laid on the table of the House on Thursday, August 2nd, 2018, and pursuant to provisions of Section 15.1 of the Statutory Instruments Act and Standing Order 210.4b, annuls in entirety the Traffic, Driving Schools, Driving Instructors, and Driving Licenses Rules 2018. Now, I see not so much interest in this particular one. You have members who want to speak to it? I see Honorable Murugara, the member for the Raka.
Only referring around 6 passengers, and we don't have a thorough training for these particular drivers, public transport drivers, who ferry, sometimes even a bus, 30 to 40 passengers. Honorable Speaker, the lives of the passengers are in the hands of the drivers. So, Honorable Speaker, I really do support the annulment of this particular act, but we should go further. The committee should go further and come up with the rules and regulations that will govern the issuance of driving licenses to public transport drivers. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
Let's go back to the mover, please, to finalize.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I think I would like, since I think it's clear that most members are supporting this particular annulment and does it would have very, far-reaching effects on people, I would request that we move to see if the House can adopt it if we have the right quorum, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
I
so
beg to move.
You have moved. So we'll proceed, and we do not satisfy our standing orders in this particular one, so we will not proceed. On that specific one, we'll move to the next order.
Order number 10, motion. Report on consideration of the Energy, Solar Water Heating Regulations 2012.
Okay, again, Honorable Sholei.
Honorable Speaker, I beg that the House adopts the report on the Committee on Delegated Legislation laid on the table of this House on Thursday, August 2nd, 2018, pursuant to the provisions of Section 15.1 of the Statutory Instruments Act and the Standing Order 210.4b to annul in its entirety the Energy, Solar Water Heating Regulations of 2012. Honorable Speaker, sir, the Select Committee on Delegated Legislation is established to scrutinize regulations that are made by regulating making authorities that are permitted by an Act of Parliament. Honorable Speaker, sir, the Energy Act 2006, Section 63 and Section 110 provide that the Minister may make regulations for or with respect to any matter that pertains to that Act. Honorable Speaker, in exercise of that power, the Minister of Energy, as he was then known, published the Energy Solar Water Heating Regulations in 2012. That is at the time of the 11th Parliament. On the 25th May 2012, via legal notice number 43 of 2012. And it was done as subsidiary legislation under the Energy Act number 12 of 2006. Mr. Speaker, sir, you will recall that the Energy, Solar and Water Heating Regulations 2012 required that the buildings that consume more than 100 liters, not 1,000, 100 liters of hot water a day were required to install hot water heating systems. Mr. Speaker, sir, because of concerns raised by members of the public on the cost of converting to solar energy, the public were given a further 5-year window to enable owners of buildings that consume more than 100 liters to install solar water systems. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee observed that 100 liters is such a low number that nearly all school hostels, all buildings will mostly be affected. especially in the urban areas. Honorable Speaker, sir, the window lapsed on the 25th of May 2017, implying that the Energy Regulation Commission could then recommend prosecution for non-compliance to all property owners, which included a 1-year prison term or 1 million shilling fine. Several building owners across the country would be affected. There was also a risk that the property owners would transfer this cost to the tenants through higher rent, therefore punishing members of the public. Mr. Speaker, sir, the regulations also required that domestic residential homes with 3 bedrooms and educational institutions such as colleges, boarding schools, with more than 20 students or more were to meet these solar energy regulations. Other premises targeted were hotels, hostels, lodges, and similar, the ones that provide boarding services. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Statutory Instruments Act, Section 12, empowers the committee to scrutinize statutory instruments previously published before the commencement of the Statutory Instruments Act. And I must commend yourself and the substantive speaker because you are instrumental in ensuring that delegated legislation now comes to the House. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm aware that had this not been the case, Kenyans would now be paying an added cost in rent because of this very prohibitive and expensive requirement. In fact, Honorable Speaker, it would have been a national crisis. Honorable Speaker, sir, in recalling these regulations, the committee then conferred with the regulation-making authority, that is the Energy Regulation Commission, commonly known as ERC, on the 29th of May 2018, pursuant to Section 16 of the Statutory Instruments Act. The committee then proceeded to scrutinize the regulations. Honorable Speaker, sir, the committee considered the regulations against the Constitution, the Energy Act, the Statutory Instruments Act, the Interpretation and General Provisions Act, and reviewed them comprehensively. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee then made the following observations: that the regulations were not accompanied by an explanatory memorandum, which is required under the Statutory Instruments Act, Section 11. In the absence of the memorandum, it is not possible for the committee to analyze the extent of public participation or the level of consultation conducted with members of the public in order to test the viability and the practicability of these regulations. Mr. Speaker, sir, secondly, the regulations also provide for a fine of 1 million shillings, which contravenes the Statutory Instruments Act, which states that the amount provided in the regulations should not exceed a maximum of 20,000 or a prison term not exceeding 6 months as set out in the Statutory Instruments Act. Anything beyond that should be in a parent statute or an act of parliament. Honorable Speaker, Section 13 of the Statutory Instruments Act provides that regulations delegated cannot impose a fine or imprisonment or a penalty that also goes beyond the Enabling and Parent Act of Parliament. In this case, the Enabling and Parent Act of Parliament is the Energy Act 2006. So the penalty prescribed contravened both the Statutory Instruments Act and the Energy Act. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Statutory Instruments Act also, Section 6, requires that regulatory making authority, in this case the Energy Regulation Commission, should prepare a regulatory impact assessment statement. This statement is expected to lay out the socio-economic impact of the regulation that the regulations would have. The reading of these regulations from the onset, as we have laid out, would affect a considerable number of households, especially in urban areas and cities, along with institutions where our children go to school. And it would impose a significant cost on society, including parents who pay the boarding facilities and the school fees, and the tenants who have to pay rent. Mr. Speaker, sir, so pursuant to Section 13 of the Act, which allows the committee to consider any other grounds during scrutiny, it was the committee's contention that the implementation of the regulations would be punitive to landlords, to tenants, to persons occupying their own premises, as the installation of solar energy is cost prohibitive. It is also not a basic requirement, considering that the country has had a very big program of ensuring that electricity gets to every household. Therefore, the public would be overburdened, and it would affect negatively on the government's agenda for affordable housing. It is not practical also to operationalize and monitor implementation, as installing the appliances alone may not be tantamount to using it for hot water. Neither is the number of bedrooms in a house a reflection of the amount of cold water or hot water that the household does in fact use. It is therefore ambiguous and regulations in vain that are incapable of being supervised or monitored or penalties prescribed. Mr. Speaker, sir, the regulations refer also to the Local Government Act, Cap 265, which was repealed in 2011. There is therefore no need to amend regulations to comply. There is need to apply to therefore, sorry, Mr. Speaker, it is therefore necessary to amend the regulations to ensure that they comply with the current constitutional framework. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, it is a recommendation of the committee that, having considered the regulations pursuant to the provisions of the Constitution, provisions of the Energy Act, the Statutory Instruments Act, the Interpretation and General Provisions Act, which regulate the making and scrutiny and publication of regulations, and having conferred with the regulation-making authority, it is the committee's recommendation that the energy, solar and water heating regulations 2012 be annulled in its entirety for the aforementioned reasons. And I conclude, Mr. Speaker, with thanking and recognizing the tireless efforts of all the members of the Committee on Delegated Legislation. And Honorable Speaker, sir, I beg to move, and I now request that Honorable Alice Wahome, member for Kandara constituency and a member of the committee, to second this report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Proceed, Honorable Wahome.
Thank you, Chair and the Speaker, for allowing me time to second the motion as moved by the chairperson of the committee. Mr. Speaker, the chairperson has enumerated several reasons why the regulations should actually be revoked. Mr. Speaker, I just want to emphasize the fact that when these regulations, though very belatedly, came into operation, Mr. Speaker, there was huge public outcry. The reason, Mr. Speaker, for that outcry, one of the reasons, Mr. Speaker, was the punitive measures that the regulations were proposing. Mr. Speaker, you have heard from the chairperson that the penalties that were being proposed, both custodial and monetary penalties, Mr. Speaker, exceeded what the Energy Act itself provides. So from the onset, Mr. Speaker, it is obvious that the regulatory authority did not do its homework, even to compare the proposals that it was bringing forward with the parent act that gives them the authority to actually regulate. Mr. Speaker, there was no public participation. The memorandum failed to actually list where the public participation was carried out and who was engaged. Mr. Speaker, a proposal, for example, that $1 million shillings fine be put on a mother or a woman who has a 3-bedroom house, because they were also capturing a 3-bedroom house must have a solar. It did not matter the capacity of the person to actually put the solar into the house. And, you know, this is really an impact that required assessment to be done, where you demand somebody to put the solar energy in your house, and the costing, when we asked the costing from the regulatory authority, the committee was advised that the cost for solar heating in one house of 3-bedroom was between 150,000 shillings to 300,000. How many people in our rural areas will be able to afford? When we also asked them to tell us how they had marked the jurisdiction, the area within which these rules will affect. Again, Mr. Speaker, there was ambiguity and lack of clarity as to who will actually be affected. And we found that, again, that is lack of, if they had done sufficient public participation, Mr. Speaker, they would have avoided those kind of ambiguities and punitive measures. Mr. Speaker, we are supposed to be encouraging Kenyans to actually consume energy, and it is good that we are talking about solar energy. But, Mr. Speaker, it cannot come with that kind of a penalty, with that kind of a cost to people who had already built houses without knowing that there will be a requirement that you must have solar heating. Mr. Speaker, we even think that if they had done sufficient public participation, it is possible that they would have come with options so that people will have to put solar because they actually feel that there is a benefit. No incentive, Mr. Speaker. Instead, the regulations were actually providing for punitive measures that did not go very well even with the public, Mr. Speaker, and therefore the huge public outcry. Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, I support the report.
Very well. So I propose a question, which is that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation laid on the table of the House on Thursday, 2nd August 2018, and pursuant to provisions of Section 15(1) of the Statutory Instruments Act and Standing Order 210(4)B, annuls in entirety the Energy, Solar, Water Heating Regulations 2012. Let's start with Honorable Shamala.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I arise to support the annulment in its entirety of these regulations. In 2017, Kenya was ranked 80 out of the 190 countries marked for the ease of doing business, having risen from 92 in 2016. One of the key pillars of the 4-point agenda is affordable housing. And these regulations were going to make this untenable. Housing and ease of doing business go hand in hand. You have investors who come into a country, they want to employ people, they want to live in those homes, and the rents must be affordable. It would have caused the rents to skyrocket if these regulations had gone through. Another thing the committee has noted in most of the regulations that have been annulled is the lack or total disregard to public participation. Yet public participation is anchored in Article 10 of the Constitution of Kenya. It's anchored in Article 118 of the Constitution of Kenya that states that Parliament must ensure or facilitate public participation. Indeed, the policy towards solar heating is one that should be encouraged through civic education and not forced down the throats of the people of Kenya. Another observation the committee has also noted is that the regulations tend to often, the ones that are nullified, contravene the Parent Act. Going forward, the Delegated Legislation Committee would be pleased if the ministries and agencies concerned do make themselves conversant with the Statutory Instruments Act, do conduct public participation so that we do not have to get to this stage where we are nullifying regulations. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, sir, I do support the annulment of these regulations in their entirety.
Honorable Oundo Ojiambo, member for Funyula.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I stand from the onset to support the motion by virtue of what my able chair has stated. But as I support the motion, there are some pertinent issues that we need to raise on the floor of the House that probably will support and assist the ERC as they amend the regulations to ensure they come into force. First of all, to note that the entire regulations, there was no evidence of public participation, and that contradicts the law, contradicts the Constitution, and contradicts precedents that have already been set that no regulation or law, nothing in this country that having the force of law should be allowed to become law without public input. And it's becoming a vexing issue, Mr. Speaker, that many regulatory making authorities do not undertake any public participation, and if they do public participation, it's purely selective to get those members of public that what we would call would concur with the regulations. So it's a call to all regulatory making authority through the Attorney General's chamber to ensure that we comply with the requirement of public participation. It is becoming costly and a waste of time, waste of public resources, that these regulatory making authorities make regulations that end up being annulled on account that they do not comply with the provisions of Statutory Instrument Act, and more so on the question of enforcement or compliance with public participation. A second issue that becomes glaringly clear is that the regulations as crafted, while the intentions was good, as enacted in 2015, are impossible to enforce. They are so ambiguous, unclear, and badly drafted to an extent that it's practically impossible for any officer or any member of public to enforce the same. Our apprehension as a committee was that they were going to be used as an avenue to extort, an avenue to harass innocent Kenyans all over the country, by merely stating that a house of a certain size, certain number of bedrooms, or to have solar water heating system was extremely unclear, because the size of the bedroom does not indicate the amount of water to be consumed that requires solar water heating. It was even hilarious that they'd even proposed to impose regulations where there was no pipe to water, there was no running water, so essentially it was not making any sense at all. So consequently, as a committee and as an individual, it was obviously felt it did not make the threshold of practicability or application. Mr. Speaker, sir, having said that much, it is important for us to appreciate that we are moving into an era of environmental conservation. And that era requires that we comply as much as possible with green energy, and we design and construct smart buildings. And one of the requirements of smart buildings is to minimize use of non-renewable energy so that we depend mostly on renewable energy. As much as we are annulling the regulations, I want to urge the Cabinet Secretary in charge of energy, Energy Regulation Authority, and all professionals involved in the built environment to move with the speed to come up with the workable and practical regulations insofar as the use of solar energy and other renewable energy is concerned, to minimize loss of forest cover, to minimize a reliance on other forms of electricity generation like diesels, to minimize probably other sources of power that pollute the environment. We cannot just sit and wait, because the issue of electricity bills, the issue of depletion of the various sources of energy is becoming a reality in this country, and globally. We cannot sit back and wait to a point we get to a crisis, then we'll move up and down. There are very many international conventions, there are many best practices all over the world. I just want to urge ERC to get out of the comfort zone and be practical in their approach. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, if they just go to sleep and resign in fate that the Parliament has annulled the regulations, it is us, we leaders who sit here today, who will be castigated, all told that we annulled the regulations without providing an avenue to redress the issue of environment and energy use in our built environments and elsewhere. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support the motion.
Very well. Let's have Honorable John Mose, member for Kitutu Masaba. Waweru Kiarie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. However, I'd like to cede the floor and say that I'm actually looking forward to make my contribution on the report of the 49th session of the ACP Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Nyorondindi.
Thank you.
Honorable Sanko, we are following an order here. I can see you are putting up your hand. We are, we are following this, and you are sixth on the line. So keep your peace until the sixth member is speaking. It will be yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the chance. And from the onset, I want to support the annulment of the said law. Mr. Speaker, I see on the side of ERC a lot of readiness, because for them to come up with the regulations to force especially very small houses, like 3-bedroomed houses, Mr. Speaker, to have solar systems for water, Mr. Speaker, is for them being lazy and sleeping on their job. And I say this, Mr. Speaker, because whereas we understand and support that we actually need to promote green energy, Mr. Speaker, this should never come at the expense of especially people who are trying to own homes, Mr. Speaker. And for every good thing to happen, Mr. Speaker, people must never be forced to do it. We should invest more as a government, and especially ERC should invest more on having incentives to make builders and to make developers and to make house owners to go on the side of promoting green energy and not to force them, Mr. Speaker. Even at the wake of the Big Four agenda, Mr. Speaker, we are trying to promote ownership of houses in this country. But these regulations goes the opposite direction, Mr. Speaker, because especially imposing and trying to impose a fine of Kenya shilling 1 million, Mr. Speaker, this is almost the entire cost of building such a house. And Mr. Speaker, even the ambiguity that they have not even specified where these kind of solar systems should be fitted, of course now it ropes in even the houses we are building in our rural areas where there is actually no running water, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I would urge ERC not to sleep on their job and not to go to abandon the quest for green energy, but for them to be a bit innovative so that we do not seem like to force Kenyans, but to give enough incentives so that myself as a developer, I'll choose to install green energy and to install power, solar power, Mr. Speaker, other than being forced. But Mr. Speaker, even on it, I see a trend in this country where we are every day having layers and layers of a regulation. We are just debating about another issue, Mr. Speaker, about driving schools. That's about over-regulation. Here also in this issue, Mr. Speaker, about solar and storing solar energy in this kind of houses is over-regulation, Mr. Speaker. And of course, this goes against us promoting private enterprise and promoting private sector in this country, because there seems to be a concerted effort to stifle business people and to put entrepreneurs in a corner where they have to keep on fighting for their bread, Mr. Speaker. And these people are doing a lot insofar as spurring our economy is concerned. But even very important issues that were noted by the mover, Mr. Speaker, about public participation. Public participation nowadays, Mr. Speaker, is not a choice. We have to keep doing it. And even in ourselves, in our small jurisdictions, in our own constituencies, in the growth of these small geographical areas, Mr. Speaker, there is hardly anything we can do without public participation. And for ERC to come up with such far-reaching regulations, and for them not to involve the users and to involve the public, Mr. Speaker, it goes against all the stipulated laws in this country. But, Mr. Speaker, also, it is laughable that ERC, in their definition, they tend to mean that when a house is big, it translates into usage of water. Mr. Speaker, you can even have a 10-bedroom house, Mr. Speaker, and another person can have even a much smaller house. And the much smaller house can end up actually using more heated water. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I would urge ERC to be a bit more exact and to avoid ambiguity, even insofar as coming up with more regulations in the future is concerned. But my parting shot, Mr. Speaker, as I finish, we have to have a smaller government in this country, to have much less regulations so that we can promote enterprise, we can promote public sector, because they do a lot more than the few jobs that we are trying to create in this country by starting so many bodies and so many layers of regulation that goes on increasing recurrent expenditure at the expense of what we need most in this country, which is the development expenditure, and also giving a fair playing ground for business people and entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I support.
Very well. Honorable Lodepe.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. First of all, Honorable Speaker, I want to support the report and also to congratulate the committee for the work they have done. First, Honorable Speaker, the committee has protected the public. Because, Honorable Speaker, the penalties that were given by the ERC towards anybody who is not going to implement their policy, it cannot be attained. It's not practicable, as Honorable Ali said. Charging $1 million to somebody who's a poor person for not following that one, it's not attainable. You don't know how this person got the house. Maybe through Sport Pesa, or maybe through lottery, or through grandchild. So, Honorable Speaker, I support the committee for advising the body not to practice that policy. Secondly, Honorable Speaker, we are suggesting if the government can take this as a business so that they can supply energy, solar energy, to every house in this country. Because, Honorable Speaker, there are some people who cannot even afford the solar energy in this country. But if the government can take responsibility to make sure that they are supplying energy to every person in this country, it will be a step forward towards achieving the goal of making this country connected by 2022. Honorable Speaker, if the government cannot do it, then the private sector must take it so that they can do as business, so that they can charge a small fee. Because, Honorable Speaker, the counties like Turkana, West Pokot, Marsabit, we are full solar energy, full throughout the day. And, Honorable Speaker, if we can get some investors who can go to such counties to invest, Honorable Speaker, all those counties can get energy in a cheaper way. So, Honorable Speaker, as we discuss also this one, we should also make sure that it's responsibility of the government to avail energy to every household, whether one room, whether it's a rushed house, whether it's a matope house, energy is required because you cannot live in darkness at this age now that we are. So, Honorable Speaker, with these few remarks, I want to support the report, and I say congratulations to the committee. Thank you.
Very well. Honorable Pasaris, Rosanna.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you. I stand to support the motion because when you think about it, somehow this country seems to always not care about what the citizens are going through. It takes me back to the day when all of a sudden energy-saving bulbs were introduced the government came up with a project and they released energy-saving bulbs to the communities, saying we want to try and save on energy. When they did that, it was a one-off, somebody benefited, and it was done away with. When you look at solar heating systems are a good thing to have. But the thing is, they're very costly. And the way you look at the way it was programmed by the ERC, it shows that it was actually targeting, and it was going to be part of a whole corruption mix again. For me, the fact that we've actually got a committee that looked into this and said we cannot afford to do this, and we need to do away with it and shelve it, is fantastic, because we want green energy, but we need incentives. The government has to recognize that the citizens at this particular time are really hard-pressed. The economy is suffering, and for us to be able to have green energy, we need incentives, we need affordable solar systems, and we need to partner with government to ensure that we go along that route. And the fines that were being imposed were actually going to be detrimental to this country in terms of man-it-man society. The government and the people have to work together. And I think when we were thinking about our constitution, we were thinking about how can we own as citizens the government and the government's programs. And public participation is crucial and it's key. And the fact that it wasn't done, I honestly am grateful that today we will stand here and we will say that no, we do not agree that the citizens of this country should be subjected to something positive, but in a negative form. Thank you.
5 members. I'm not so sure who want to speak to this one, but let me, I see there is Honorable Wanyonyi, top on the list. You want to speak to this one?
Mr. Speaker, I think I want to speak on this. And I think I want to thank the committee for nulling this regulation, which I'm made to understand it was going to take effect from August this year, which I think would have got most of the people off guard. Because for me, I think I have a house in the rural area, in Ikwanza, and I think I use more than 100 liters of water per day because of many dependents that I stay with. And I didn't know anything about it, Mr. Speaker. I'm a member of this house, and it appears that I think largely the committee has nullified this because there was no public participation. I want to thank them for that, because I think most people have been caught unawares, including me. And you're telling me that if they found me out, I'll pay 1 million shillings. I think, again, that's very punitive. Secondly, I have a house or 2 houses, and they don't have this solar energy fitted because we were built, those houses I bought them some times back, and they were not fitted with the solar energy. And I didn't even think about it. You can now imagine how many Kenyans would have actually paid the fine on this. Therefore, I think much as, of course, we are moving away, we want to have the green energy production as opposed to the conventional way of doing it, because, Mr. Speaker, as you know, we have a problem with rainfall, and the rain patterns in this country are actually changing, and therefore, getting water from the normal hydro power production is becoming a problem. Of course, we do not even have energy, like, for example, the oil that we just discovered in Turkana. So, Mr. Speaker, I think all in all, I think this committee did a good thing to nullify all this regulation. But again, let's give them time. Give them the shortest time, and I hope the chair is listening, that much as we have nullified this, please, let's give them time so that they can be able to come back to the original proposal of whatever they were doing. So with those few remarks, I support the committee's report.
Sankok, I really want to see the angle you will bring on this one this time.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And from the onset, let me congratulate the committee for such a wonderful job, because these regulations were very punitive, and there were regulations that were meant to scare away investors. Honorable Speaker, at times we come up with regulation, not necessarily to assist the common mwananchi, but with an intention of creating some business opportunity for some individuals. Honorable Speaker, a case in point was in the year 2000 when there was an anticipation of La Nina after the 1997 El Nino. Some good people of this country imported very big generators that were meant to be hired by government institution and by private institution. But Honorable Speaker, God was not in the midst of all those who predicted of a La Nina. So therefore, there were no La Nina in Kenya. So for them to have their generators that were imported by very powerful people in this country, they had to introduce an artificial kind of La Nina by releasing the waters of the dams so that their imported generator can be hired. Honorable Speaker, I remember that time I was a SONU chairman in the University of Nairobi, and from very reliable sources, it was an artificial La Nina, and I thank God that time University of Nairobi was not rationed in electricity because we realized their ill motives and ill intention. Honorable Speaker, so this may be another creation of a business opportunity to some individual. So, Honorable Speaker, the committee to have come up with a report of annulling this regulation, they did a very good job, especially that there were no public participation. Honorable Speaker, it does not mean that if you have a big house, then water consumption is equivalent to the size of the house. For those of us who have been hustlers, who have stayed even in a single room, 10 of us, we know that sometimes even a single room can have a bigger population than even a bigger house. Because we have, there was times we were surviving in a single room, 10 of us, and you can imagine the consumption of water in that particular single room as compared to a 3-bedroom house of a husband and a wife with one child. Honorable Speaker, therefore, this particular regulation were very punitive, and I thank the committee for coming up with a report of annulling this particular regulation, and I support. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Dr. Nyikal, and I'm not so sure if the other members really want to speak. There are only 2 more.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I see.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the committee report, and I must start by really congratulating this committee. This report we are seeing, the report we just passed, indicate that they actually do a good job. They're diligent. They look at the laws. They look at the constitution and everything, and pick up these issues. On this particular one, Mr. Speaker, they did realize that the ERC did not even do public participation, did not even do the following procedures. The documents they were supposed to attach to the documents, they did not do that. And even the process, they did not. Further than that, Mr. Speaker, the law limited the sanctions. They went way beyond those sanctions. $1 million, where the maximum was 20,000. I think that is almost criminal. So for them to really pick that, and people would have suffered, Mr. Speaker, if they did not pick it, and 100 liters of many households. Schools of only 20 students. That's a school that is struggling, cannot even afford that. Then they say. So, Mr. Speaker, they are doing a good job, but also those who came with these regulations actually did an extremely shoddy job. It shouldn't have even reached the committee. Mr. Speaker, it brings 2 main issues. One, we are going to lose the value and the principle of delegated legislation. Mr. Speaker, this is an important principle because it is not possible at the time of enacting the Mother Act to visualize all things that may come. that may affect the public. But this provision is given so that those who are in responsibility, the ministries, the departments, the agencies, when in their good wisdom they have noted that there are issues that need to be raised that were not raised or were too much of a detail in the Mother Act, then they bring it for the good of the public. And such as looking at the policy of housing. They know that we want to encourage people for housing. Looking at the policy on environment conservation, they know that we do. And it is for such reasons that we have made the provisions of delegated legislation and for the provision of regulations. So if they are not followed and they keep coming here and we are dropping, they keep coming here, committees are dropping them, then we know they are not doing the correct work. Mr. Speaker, to bring something that is against the law, all ministries, all agencies, all departments either have legal departments or have access to the Attorney General. How can they bring to the committees of the House the issues that actually are against the law? That is the bare minimum. They can't get a team of experts, put them together, get the document, don't look at its legal implications, and bring it to the House. I think, Mr. Speaker, that is irresponsible. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, the issue of using solar for energy is something that the government should move forward. We need more regulations, but we should look at even regulations that is concerning the costs, the cost of solar heaters, the cost of solar equipment, so that we have incentives so that people can actually move in that direction, conserve energy, and even save money for themselves. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I do support the report of the committee. But I say the ministries, agencies, and departments must do the thorough work before they bring any work before the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to add my voice and in support of this the annulment of these regulations. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, I think there's a tendency with the regulation-making bodies to circumvent the law, even when it is very clear, like in this case. And I think the point should be made that time has come when they are not going to escape with this kind of regulations. Mr. Speaker, sir, like in this case, it's very clear that the regulation-making body deliberately failed to comply with the Constitution, in that there was no public participation. And for the committee to have made that conclusion, it was because these regulations were submitted deliberately with no explanatory memorandum, so to show that what public participation was done, and in the event, to what extent. Further, Mr. Speaker, sir, it's very clear that these regulations were made contrary to the Parent Act, the Enabling Act, because the Enabling Act, which is the Energy Act, does not grant the authority to make regulations which have fines, which have they have fines, they have provisions to fine people, to imprison people in case they don't comply, and also which regulations are very clear, contrary to the Statutory Instrument Act, which says that the maximum fine is 20,000, and you go and impose a fine of 1 million. I think time has come when these bodies, these authorities, when they are submitting these regulations, they should at least go through the Parent Act, go through the Constitution, to ensure that whatever they submit comply with the Constitution and the enabling piece of legislations. Further, also, even as they do these regulations, it is good to look at the aspect, the living conditions of the Kenyans. Like when you say a 3-bedroom house should have a solar, it is very difficult to, and even the house which has already been constructed, it is very difficult for someone living in a 3-bedroom house to start factoring the cost of putting or installing the solar without considering that what was even the cost of that house. We have some houses which are 3-bedroom house, but also their cost of construction is even less than $1 million shillings. So with those remarks, Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to support.
Leader of Majority Party, that would be the last one on this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation that seeks to annul the energy, in bracket, solar water heating regulations 2012. Mr. Speaker, you will observe that these regulations were published before the enactment of the Statutory Instrument Act, which guides and facilitates and provides the scrutiny of statutory instruments. And therefore, I can comfortably say that it was not subjected to the examination by the House. And I want to thank the Committee on Delegated Legislation for introducing this matter to our attention for deliberation and debate. And Mr. Speaker, I want to go on record that as a Member of Parliament for Garissa Township, I have the exclusive right, based on the report that I read and analyze, which one to support and which one to oppose. I will never be coerced, intimidated on a thing that I don't believe in. And I have stayed in this House, this is my 12th year. So, Mr. Speaker, and that's why I am supporting a report that is annulling a government regulation, because I am convinced they have given all the reasons. So even if it's a government, a regulation from a government entity, I am obliged, after going through that, they violated the Constitution. In fact, the first one, which I missed, the first one on the traffic, there were a number of violations of the Constitution, including even the age limit of who should be given a license. So, Mr. Speaker, those out there who feel that they can intimidate me, I am telling them I have been here for a long period. So, and I am ready. And Mr. Speaker, that's why I'm saying every report comes to the plenary, members will, in one way or the other, based on the content of that report, express their views. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we all appreciate, Mr. Speaker, the benefits of introducing energy solutions that will reduce global warming, that will improve our environment, our health, and our economy. We appreciate that. And I therefore, from the onset, Mr. Speaker.
Kamket, what is it?
Mr. Speaker, you've heard the Honorable Leader of Majority stating that he feels intimidated by some forces and that he is ready to stand against those forces. Could he, Honorable Speaker, clarify that which are these forces that have been intimidating the Leader of Majority?
Actually, I didn't hear it, so the Leader of Majority...
Mr. Speaker, you know I'm a pastoralist. And this Member of Parliament, his party has only 5 members. When my past party has 175. And from where I come, we don't respond to those who own 20 goats, 30 goats. So I expected, if it was from ODM, I could have responded. But this is a party with 5 members. But I want to say that I'm sure he read in the media that people were saying the Leader of Majority, the Leader of Minority. So, Madam Speaker, and now because there's a change of guard, and I said long time, when there's a change of guard, there must be some ritual, so that the member speaking can know that there is power taking over of power. Now, but Madam Speaker, I have said before I was rudely interrupted by the member for Tiati, who in this House was represented. And he is one of my very active members in the Pastoralist Parliamentary Caucus. And you know, I'm his patron, so he must respect when the patron is speaking. The patron in the pastoralist is equivalent to the president or the deputy president. So, Honorable Kamket, The pastoralists are watching you, but on a light touch. I'm sure you will agree with me. You are one member who will not be intimidated. So I'm following your footsteps. So, Madam Speaker, I have said we all appreciate the benefit of introducing energy solutions that will reduce global warming, improve our environment, improve our health, and our economy. I must therefore, Madam Speaker, from the onset, seek to promote the use of alternative energy. And on the contrary, Madam Speaker, I also firmly believe that if we are to achieve accelerated growth in the economy, we must reduce our dependency on imported or foreign energy sources. I therefore observe that these regulations, Madam Speaker, if considered, will greatly support one of the 4 key pillars of the Jubilee government, and they are anchored in law, and there is a serious public participation. Madam Speaker, I really want to welcome back the leader of the minority. This is the only man who has, his party is next to Jubilee. So if he stands to ask me a question, I can reply. But you know, parties with 11 members, 14 members, 5. Madam Speaker, yeah, I can see Honorable Wanyonyi is getting agitated. He's also, his party has 12 members. His party has 12 members, so still it's in the pastoralist context. It still falls short of my response. So, Madam Speaker, we need to make the House lively. You know, you should not get agitated. It's my nature to make the House lively. Yeah, you know, you can't just read and read. And it's good Honorable Captain asked. But Madam Speaker, as we discuss this regulation, Kenya is a signatory of the Climate Change Convention, and we are committed as a country to implement sources that protect our ecosystem, the Mau ecosystem, for example, and our future generations. And we insist, however, Madam Speaker, that such measures must be produced procedurally and in conformity with our Constitution and the regulatory framework. And that is why, you know, the delegated legislation under the able leadership of Honorable Boss Sholei, he's here to tell me, you know, how this word boss, is it English? Is it Calais? Is it pastoralist? Yeah, marriage is pastoralist. That they have looked at the procedure and the constitutionality and the regulatory framework. Have they conformed to that? And I'm sure on that basis is why this piece of legislation, this instrument act regulation is being annulled. Madam Speaker, regulations were published after the proclamation of a new constitution. Article 10 of the Constitution on values and Article 118 of the Constitution on public participation. Madam Speaker, of law and policy is no longer an optional. It's not an option. If you want to develop law or policy, and more so again, the only body that can make or change a piece of law is this House, Madam Speaker. So it's no longer an optional requirement. Regulations of this nature must be structured. Madam Speaker, these regulations were not structured. Regulations of this nature must be well informed and sufficiently must be publicized. The enterprising citizen of our nation, Madam Speaker, who work day and night to build the economy should be informed of the rationale and the implications of introducing regulations. And I'm sure, I hope those guys of the energy sector are listening to me. That those citizens that you make these regulations for, who work day and night, must be informed on the rationale and the implication of introducing the regulation. Madam Speaker, you will agree with me that the deterrence theory, which seeks to impose swift and severe punishment does not apply in every situation, and that the imposition of a fine of 1 million shilling for contravening these regulations is highly punitive and unlawful. And I'm sure that is why the committee led by Honorable Sholei looked at all that. And we want chairs and colleagues to take their time when they want to bring a report to this House. It's bring a report to this House, Madam Speaker, and I have served. I have served in this House as an assistant minister with the sole business of answering questions, every very, very able legal mind. And we took them through and we told them these are the shortcomings. This, we have no problem. These pieces, we have a problem. They went and rectified. Some of them required amendment to the KDF Act. And that amendment is in the Statute Law Miscellaneous Amendment Bill currently before the House. So this is how we make laws. So I really want to thank them. And for effectiveness in terms of implementation, citizens must play an important role, and it's not a choice because they have been given by the Constitution of Kenya. With those many remarks, I beg to support.
Very well. I see the Honorable Leader of Majority. You're almost qualifying to be the grandfather of this House.
Yeah.
With the vast experiences you have outlined. Before I call the mover to reply, we have pupils from Memon Academy that is Mvita constituency, and I can see the Member of Parliament is right here. I hope the students are still up there. You're most welcome. I now call upon the mover to reply.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I reply, I first want to thank all those honorable members who have contributed to this motion, but also to thank them for the kind compliments, especially the Leader of Majority, and all, and I think my committee and I are greatly humbled by your comments. As I reply and conclude, Madam Speaker, I wish to clarify that I know that my committee, including myself, are committed to clean energy, especially myself, as I am an environmental law major. And therefore, no one supports clean energy more than myself. However, I hope that the comments that have been made by honorable members today sends a clear and very strong message to the Electricity Regulatory Authority to inform them that you cannot achieve clean energy by punishing and forcing citizens to adopt solar heating methodologies. Remember that it is just only recently there has been a big push by the government to what they call the last mile, and they are putting electricity in every household in the most rural areas. Transformers are all over the place, and electricity is being installed. And then all of a sudden, without notice, you inform the public that we will punish you for using that very electricity that you supported us to install in our homes. I think it is unfair, and even if the Electricity Regulatory Authority or Commission, wants to promote solar energy, then it has to be done progressively in a phased-out approach. You can decide that instead of saying that everyone who has a home must install solar energy, what you instead can do is say for all new buildings, there will be no approvals except for installation of solar energy. And then create incentives for those who already have existing buildings by either subsidizing or lowering the cost of the installation of that equipment. The government can subsidize it, and it will be possible for people to install it so that you promote it and incentivize them to put in clean energy. But it cannot be achieved by making it compulsory. In fact, when our committee, you notice that some of the members said that the regulation was bordering on absurdity, it's because you cannot punish someone and give them a penalty of 1 million shillings, yet the house on which you want them to install solar energy does not even cost 1 million shillings. It is totally unfair and completely disregards fairness and the rights of citizens. And with that, we hope that the Electricity Regulatory Commission will come with a long-term vision and decide to encourage installation of solar water heating systems over a period of time. We know that some of our students, our schools, don't even have windows. How do you expect them to install solar heating systems? That is not possible and not achievable in a short term unless it is done in a more calculated manner. And Madam Speaker, as I'm still on my feet, I beg and to request the understanding order number 53.3 that the putting of the question be deferred to a further time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Very well, Honorable Shale, and a commendable job there for you and your committee. We shall go by the standing orders by deferring the putting of the question of the Energy Solar Heating Regulations report until such a time as the House Business Committee will slot it in the order paper. Next order.
Order number 11, motion. Report of the 49th session of the ACP Parliamentary Assembly and intersessional meetings of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly.
Honorable Kato.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that this House notes the report of the 49th session of the ACP Parliamentary Assembly and intersessional meetings of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly held at the ACP House and the European Parliament in Brussels, Belgium on March 20th to 22nd, 2018, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, July 24th, 2018. Madam Speaker, ACP-EU is actually, it stands for African, Caribbean, Pacific, and European Union. It's a partnership which is legally binding between 28 countries from European Union and 78 from the African, Caribbean, Pacific. Its works mostly deals with issues on trade, development cooperation, and at times discuss political issues as well. And in doing so, Madam Speaker, it considers a lot of human rights issues, democratic principles that are a prerequisite for partner states, which are our member states, to comply with or face certain sanctions. It also has an elaborate dispute resolution or a settlement mechanism. And actually, it is organized in form of 3 organs. One is the Council of Ministers, mostly the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, or in some countries, depending on the ministries that dealing with the matters foreign. There is also another one, which is a committee of ambassadors, and that is why, Madam Speaker, even in Kenya, our representative as an ambassador in Brussels always calls the ambassador to Belgium, Luxembourg, and then the European Union, being the headquarters of this organ, the European Union. And also, there is also a joint parliamentary assembly. It's called GPA. GPA, the Joint Parliamentary Assembly, is for the ACP and EU, both the African, Caribbean, and Pacific, also with the EU member states. That's why it's called Joint Parliamentary. And Madam Speaker, it has some, this association has some predictable multi-annual resources. And for instance, from 2014 to 2020, the current agreement, lasts from 2014 to 2020, there is what is called the European Development Fund that, is mostly the financial instrument outside the European Union budget. It has, for that period I've stocked of 2014-2020, an allocation of 30.5 billion euros. And it is, strictly from direct contribution by the EU member state. So, Madam Speaker, what we are discussing in the motion is the 49th session since the formation of this ACP, that is African, Caribbean, and Pacific Parliamentary Association, and it took place on 21st March 2018 in Brussels, Belgium. But before that joint assembly, Madam Speaker, there were some committee meetings that were held prior to that. Like the first one was a meeting of the working group on post-Cotonou. This post-Cotonou, Madam Speaker, it's good to understand because it will be repeated many times, especially when we are talking of the ACP-EU for the period of 2014 to 2020. This meeting on post-Cotonou was held on 19th March. I will explain what is post-Cotonou. So the meeting about it was held on 19th March 2018. Then there was a second meeting which was held on 20th of March 2018, and that was a meeting of ACP. Now ACP before EU, because this partnership is in two components: the ACP, then the EU part of it. And again, the third one was now the 49th session of the ACP Parliamentary Assembly, which was held on 21st March. And then after that, there were intersessional committee meetings, and that's why in the report, in the motion, it is talked of the 49th session of ACP and intersessional meetings. So these intersessional meetings, Madam Speaker, were held, were meetings of ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly, and they were held on 22nd March 2018. Then the ACP itself, the committee meetings and the assembly, which took, these meetings, all of them, whether the committee meetings, the assembly, or the intersessional, they were all held at ACP House, while the intersessional meetings were held at ACP-EU, in European Parliament. Both these venues, they are all in Brussels, Belgium. Madam Speaker, the Kenyan delegation to this meeting comprised of the following members: the Honorable Katole Metito, MP, leader of delegation and from the National Assembly. Then there was Honorable Professor Margaret Kamar, MP, and from the Senate, is a Senate member of the delegation. And then the Honorable Dr. Lillian Gogo, MP, member of the National Assembly, and Honorable John Kiarie Waweru, MP, and a member of the delegation from the National Assembly. Madam Speaker, as I said, I will explain what is Cotonou for the benefit of the House. Is that the ACP-EU partnership agreements, they were signed on 23rd June 2000 in Cotonou, Benin. Cotonou is the capital city of Benin. Now, it becomes the Cotonou Agreement. Hence the name ACP-EU Partnership Agreement, or the Cotonou Agreement. So, and it was for a period of 20 years. It's ending in 2020, February. That is the time of expiring. And it covers about 100 countries with a total, because as I said, ACP, there are 78, EU, there are 28, so it gives about 106 countries. So covering over 100 countries with a total population of 1.5 billion people. And this gives the opportunity actually to rejuvenate the EU relationship with the ACP partners, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if we take into account the current global context, you see, because the most important things in terms of bilateral or even multilateral, but specifically bilateral relationship between countries, it's all about business. And for that matter, global business. So with a population of 1.5 billion people doing business or having business relation together, that is quite good, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I also want to state that in this meeting, some of the recommendations that were made, because the most important things is after these meetings, what are the recommendations or the resolutions made, are among others, there are also a recommendation to have a system where ACP members can meet on their own regularly, because previously it used to be joint meetings. But nowadays, arising from this 49th session, they are what we call regional blocks. So you can meet as regional blocks. The same way colleagues from the European Parliament can as well meet in regions and then have a position, just to expand the bargaining space in terms of business. It's good to meet as regional blocks. Then you can have a position as a region. And again, when you go to these meetings, some of the allocations, if it is even rotational leadership, they are given in terms of regional blocks. So these regional blocks can help the member states to articulate their issues very well. And actually a good example of that, arising from that, was Kenya hosted a meeting of the East African region on this. It's called the 15th regional meeting of East African region of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly. I think it took place in April 11th to 12th this year, 2018. And this is one of those good recommendations, can meet as regional blocks. Another recommendation was, it is always good it was recommended that there is need to enhance the protection of parliamentary diplomacy, especially when we talk of GPA, the Joint Parliamentary Assembly, when they have a fact-finding mission or missions in any countries, then that should be protected because it is part of parliamentary diplomacy. It's also good. It was also recommended that as a partnership, JPA, Joint Parliamentary Assembly, you can as well form election observer missions. When there are elections in your partner states, you can really be accredited to become election observer or mission. And also there is need to, which was another good recommendation made, to guarantee what they call the multi-stakeholder approach at all the relevant stages of ACP-EU activities. That multi-stakeholder approach is very necessary in giving strength and synergy to what a certain region want to push. Like for instance, it talks of post-Cotonou, because the Cotonou agreement is coming to an end in 2020. So talk of post-Cotonou, because this is about issues to do with doing business with the European Union. It will be better to take a multi-stakeholders approach. Like for instance, ACP. ACP could negotiate as ACP in terms of, that is African, Caribbean, Pacific countries, which are 78 in number, can negotiate together as a multi-stake and have a common stand and negotiate with the European Union counterparts. Madam Speaker, a good one is, see the way now the East African community is negotiating with the European Union what we call EPAs. these efforts about, you know, the business within East Africa, you see, if we don't negotiate as a bloc, then you find Kenya being isolated, because the rest of the East African partner states, even if that negotiation package does not go through, then they will still import things to European Union using the window, what is called everything but arms. And then Kenya, because in East African countries, it is only Kenya that is not among the LDCs, what we call the least developed countries. And there is an entry point for LDCs, that is the least developed countries, to access European markets on everything. That is, that's what they call everything but arms. But if we take this multi-stakeholders approach beyond even East Africa and approach it as an ACP approach with a common stand, then we will all benefit. Madam Speaker, there are some other issues that were discussed in this 49th session, like the issue of illegal trade, okay, in specifically what is called phytosanitary products, seeds and other agricultural inputs. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to report that when the 15th regional meeting of ACP-EU was held here in Kenya, actually we visited, we call it what, KEFI's lab there in Karen, and this thing of the phytosanitary products that, and the seeds and the agricultural inputs were actually, you know, we were able to visit that research and the labs, you know, premises. And in that 49th session, Kenya took a strong position that there was need to have emphasis on research and development on various aspects of agroeconomy. Of course, we are an agroeconomy. We, like many other ACP countries, we rely on agriculture. And therefore, for us to improve on that and also protect our originality of these products, there is need to have emphasis on research and development, and this will improve quality of produce that we send to European Union market. And therefore, we implored on our fellow parliamentarians as the Kenyan delegation to enact laws on stiffer penalties on persons engaged in illegal trade of phytosanitary products, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, other deliberations that really took place in this 49th session were issues to do with the fight against cybercrime. A lot of presentations were done in this meeting that time. And actually, when we were doing the cybercrime bill in our country was before the National Assembly, and also the issue of drug trafficking. So very pertinent issues were discussed. The role of parliamentarians on monitoring work and action of the United Nations, especially peacekeepers. You know, these peacekeepers, they have really been, you know, all over the world. And even as we speak, we have a petition before my committee, the Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations, that we were deliberating on, you know, members who petition the Kenyan government, specifically KDF, to withdraw the KDF soldiers from Somali. But you see, if you looked into it, they are under AMSON, and AMSON is also working and approved with the United Nations, so as a peacekeeping force. So it was discussed that there is need for parliamentarians, because ACP-EU is purely for parliamentarians, sitting parliamentarians. And therefore, they were also saying there is need for parliamentarians to be involved in monitoring the work and actions of the United Nations peacekeepers, need to monitor the physical cooperation of ACP countries, specifically on EU list of non-compliance on tax jurisdiction. Madam Speaker, there was actually, there was a presentation done during the 49th session on which countries have not complied with the tax jurisdiction with EU. So, especially the ACP countries. So it was also felt that it is good that as members of parliament forming that joint parliamentary association of ACP, there is need for parliamentarians to be fully involved on physical cooperation. And therefore, and especially physical cooperation on tax jurisdiction with regards to the European Development Fund, because as I said, there is an European Development Fund that is solely a contribution of EU member states to these ACP countries. Therefore, and also there is also, it was also discussed the issue of the impact and effectiveness of the EU Emergency Trust Fund. That is for Africa on key countries of origin and transit of migrants, combating the destabilization effects of wildlife trafficking in ACP countries. And actually that was also discussed at length, the need to protect our environment, specifically the issue of wildlife trafficking. And there was also, to some extension, the need to protect the environment in terms of forests, because you will not have wildlife and forest is one and the same thing, because they are all part of the environment. And I think it is in that regard that we are trying as a country to conserve the Mau forest. Madam Speaker, so those things were discussed in length, the issue of wildlife trafficking, the need to promote implementation of external dimension of the EU action plan against wildlife trafficking. So, Madam Speaker, I really don't want to take much of the time, because I also said in that respect, when as a Kenyan delegation, we issued a statement on the hosting of the 15th regional meeting of East African region of the same, that is of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly, and it took place from 11th to 13th April 2018 here at Intercontinental Hotel in Nairobi. That is after the 49th session, which was held in Brussels. Madam Speaker, I want to really thank the delegation, the Kenyan delegation, for actually being very actively involved on matters that were discussed. I will not actually exhaust within 10 to 20 minutes what was discussed for 3 days, but some of my colleagues are here to add more meat on it. But before I give them, Madam Speaker, it's also good that I extend my appreciation to the speakers of the two houses, that is the Senate and the National Assembly, for allowing us to attend the session and for facilitating travel and accommodation, providing logistics and technical support in liaisons with the offices of the clerks from the two houses. But I don't want actually to conclude without mentioning that, Madam Speaker, we have a Kenyan team led by the Kenyan Deputy Ambassador to the Kingdom of Belgium, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg and the European Union, Mr. Patrick Zuzi, together with Mr. Githaiga and Madam Dorothy Ndiwa. They were all from the Kenyan embassy in Brussels. They were at hand actually to receive the delegation, and throughout the session, they provided us with technical support for these meetings. And I think with those few remarks, Madam Speaker, I heard the members saying they have experience of being assistant ministers before, so they knew how to. Those of us who are full cabinet ministers, I think I have used that wisdom to this report to the House for information and noting. And with your permission, allow Honorable Didaraso to second. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Very well, Honorable Kato. And it is commonly said, do I say? So the others were assistant ministers, and there are some who are full. Honorable Dido.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise to second this report. And I want to thank the head of delegation for having provided leadership on this, and also during the Kenyan delegation visit. Madam Speaker, what comes to mind looking at this report, and also Kenya's participation in the ACP Assembly, is over quote, you are confined only by the walls you build yourself. As Kenyan delegation, as we go out there to represent our country, actually we get a lot of experiences, but also we showcase what Kenya has to offer out there at both national, regional, and the international level. Madam Speaker, this particular ACP Assembly provides us a unique forum where Kenya, as a major regional player in the larger East African rim, and also in Africa, to be able to provide both political and economic leadership in terms of what the ACP countries also have to offer and negotiate with the European Union. Madam Speaker, as you know, one of the major areas of concern and also of contestation between EU and ACP is on matters trade, where the post-Cotonou arrangement is actually what is on the table, where both sides, because one is industrialized, major economies, whereas the ACP mainly are developing countries or the least developed countries, where there is that exchange between the raw materials and also, from the other side, machinery and finished product. So one of the areas of concern that we as Kenyans, we really take cognizance of is issues like trade barriers and entry into market of the Kenyan goods. So I think the area of post-Cotonou is where our technocrats, particularly in Brussels and in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, are grappling with. They are burning the midnight oil to make sure that we are not left behind. Madam Speaker, the other area of concern that Chairman and also the leader of delegation has alluded to is in the area of clean energy and environmental protection. The European Union has put on the table about 30.5 billion euros between the year 2014 and 2020. This is the piece of cake that countries that are innovative, that are able to come up with smart ideas, particularly in terms of protection of environment and generating clean energy, are able to bite from this cake by providing their options or by giving, putting forward their proposals that how can Kenya benefit from this. And in this, I think one of the major areas that the European Union is looking at is places like the Lake Turkana wind power that is going to generate 360 megawatts to the national grid. Madam Speaker, the other area of concern that we both as legislators and Kenyans have been able to share during this particular forum with our European counterparts is the area of wildlife trafficking and also trafficking in endangered species. And also added to that is the area of tourism, where the Europeans actually found out clearly that when you compare Kenya and Dubai, they say that the two cannot be compared. That when you go to Dubai, you look at brick walls, glasses made by human hands. While in Kenya, as you come to Masai Mara, to Amboseli, to the Kenyan coast, you see nature in its pristine shape. What we offer actually is much more better than what individuals or humans are able to create out there. And one of the major concerns for us as Kenyans and also others within the international community is how we must protect our environment, our wildlife, and also in terms of how do we lessen the human-animal conflict. That is one of the reasons why our people are trying to destroy the habitat of those natural species. And I think it's one of the things that this country can showcase when we say that the wild beast migration is the 8 wonders of the world. I think many will agree on that. Madam Speaker, the other area of concern for both the ACP and the EU is in the area of migration. You know, in the 18th century or 17th century, 16th century, the Europeans actually were moving south. In the 21st century, the Africans and maybe the Asians are moving north. It is a major conurbation of human interaction. Why were those people moving south those early years, and why are we moving north at this point in our lives? I think the area of migration also brings about the issue of cultural interaction, the issue of conflict, matters such as terrorism. So there are many issues that are involved. Finally, Madam Speaker, they have in this forum of ACP-EU the social and political dimension, where the social dimension is about the youth and women empowerment. The major part of our population today as Kenyans, that almost 60% of our population is youth and women. So that makes them a major stakeholders in our economy. On the political side, I think there is the political dimension to the ACP-EU.
Wind up, Honorable Russell.
Where the ACP-EU are thinking, how do we interact post-Cotonou? Do EU just go to the African Union and negotiate with them, or country block by block? Madam Speaker, thank you very much for the time. I beg to second.
Honorable Kato, are you going or coming? Okay.
Honorable members, I go on to propose a question, which is that this House notes the report of the 49th session of the ACP-Parliamentary Assembly and intersessional meetings of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly held at the ACP House and the European Parliament in Brussels, Belgium on March 20th to 22nd, 2018, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, July 24th, 2018. Honorable Kiarie.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And actually, I stand to support that this report actually be tabled and adopted. And what I'd like to say, Madam Speaker, is that this African, Caribbean, and Pacific August Assembly is actually a really important formation. And Madam Speaker, although it is never said as such, it is not lost to us as members of Parliament that this very esteemed joint assembly, by its very formation, is actually a round table engagement of former colonizer countries and their colonies. Madam Speaker, in the larger scheme of things, and especially in this new emerging world order, where we are seeing former superpowers falling and weakening, while newer superpowers are coming up and rising, the deliberations of the 49th session of the ACP Parliamentary Assembly could not have been more timely. And especially, Madam Speaker, in the light of the new era that is dawning, that is being popularly called, as the leader of delegation called it, the post-Cotonou era, where we shall be able, former Prime Minister, we have seen many other handshakes around the world, one of which is a handshake between the President of the United States and the leader of North Korea. We have seen the leader of North Korea shaking hands with the leader of South Korea. We have seen the President of the United States shaking hands with the President of Russia. And as such, the people who are at the Joint Parliamentary Assembly did laud this very, I would call it landmark political gesture between our President and the former Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, finally, what I'd like to say, and actually this is a recommendation I'd like to put forward, is that bearing in mind the nature of the deliberations at the ACP-EU Assembly, I propose that it would be a great idea to have a permanent delegation from this National Assembly, because these are the people who are going to be carrying the institutional memory of the deliberations at this assembly. Madam Speaker, I'd like to say that on my part, when I was appointed to go for this assembly, I actually did not sleep throughout my flights from here to all the way to where the assembly was being held, because I had to appraise myself with the nature of the deliberations at this assembly, to appraise myself on past deliberations, to see what it means to talk about post-Cotonou. And as such, Madam Speaker, I'd like to recommend that the people who are appointed, and it doesn't have to be the Member of Parliament from Dagoretti South, but the people who are appointed to attend to these matters as a delegation, I would propose that they be a permanent delegation, permanent members to this assembly. Madam Speaker, I'd like to say that there is going to be an opportunity for Kenya to rise up as a regional leader in matters politics, economy, and social affairs, as we open up the discussion post-Cotonou, as has been stated by the leader of delegation and also by Honorable Rasso. Madam Speaker, I'd like to say that it is indeed a new world. And I'd like to end by quoting a Turkish author and playwright who said that a new world order is not going to be created until we establish an order where the powerful wolf cannot eat the weak lamb. Even as we go into these deliberations between what I called former colonizers and former colonies, I'd like to say that we should be negotiating towards a new world order where the powerful wolf will not be able to eat the weak lamb. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for that opportunity.
Very well, Honorable Kiarie. I see no more interest in contributing to this motion. And on that note, I call upon the mover, Honorable Russell. You may reply.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the time and also having allowed our team to present its report. Madam Speaker, this will form part of the parliamentary records and also historical records that others who will come after us will be able to look at and maybe work with it and see changes that might come from this point onwards. Madam Speaker, I beg to reply, but putting the question, I want to stand on Standing Order 53, subsection 3, questions to be put to be deferred until a later date. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Very well, Honorable Russell. And we shall be bound by that standing order at this particular time. We will defer the putting of the question on this motion until the time, such other time, that the House Business Committee will slot it in the order paper. Let's move on to the next order.
Order number 12, motion, report of the 138th Assembly of the Inter-parliamentary Union, IPU, and related meetings.
Honorable William Kamket.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to move that this House notes the report of the 138th Assembly of the Inter-parliamentary Union, IPU, and related meetings held in Geneva, Switzerland on March 22 to 28, 2018, laid on the table of the House on 24th July 2018. Honorable Speaker, just for the sake of honorable members who have no idea, because I do appreciate that this House is relatively new in terms of percentage of members. The IPU, or Inter-parliamentary Union, the World Organization of Parliaments, is a global forum for parliamentary dialogue, cooperation, and action. The Union advances democracy and assists parliaments and parliamentarians throughout the world to fulfill their mandates. At the time of this assembly, there were 178 members, parliaments of the IPU. The IPU facilitates parliamentary debate, dialogue and cooperation, and also promotes and defends democracy and the rule of law while assisting parliaments in coping with growing international agenda relevant to their duties. The IPU Assembly is a principal statutory body that expresses the views of an Inter-parliamentary Union on political issues. It brings together parliaments to study international problems and make recommendations for parliamentary and government action. The Assembly meets twice a year and is held each time in a different country, providing participants with an opportunity to see various national realities. The IPU hearing at Geneva on the said dates in Switzerland, the theme of this year's hearing was strengthening the global regime for migrants and refugees the need for evidence-based policy solutions. Madam Speaker, the Kenyan delegation was led by the Speaker of the Senate, Honorable Ken Lusaka, and other members. There were, among the membership that went to this meeting, myself, the Senator Enoch Wambua, Senator Susan Kihika, Honorable Owen Baya, MP, Honorable Vincent Tuwei, MP, and the Honorable Nasri Ibrahim, MP. Honorable Speaker, one of the key highlights of the IPU of this conference was the election of Senator Kihika as the Vice President of the Women Parliamentary, the Parliamentary Caucus of the IPU. And it's also good to note, Honorable Speaker, that the Speaker of the Senate, Honorable Lusaka, sits in the Executive Committee of the IPU. The other members were not able to contest other positions in the standing committees. For instance, the Standing Committee on Peace and International Security, the Standing Committee on Sustainable Development, Finance and Trade, and many other committees. There was an interest for the Standing Committee or Forum for Young Parliamentarians. But due to the presence of our Speaker, the Honorable Lusaka, at the Executive Committee, we were not able to contest other positions as per the rules of the IPU. Madam Speaker, at the IPU conference this year on the matter of refugees, one of the issues that came up that was a very highly debated was the matter of the rights of refugees to be able to vote in the countries that they live in. And that matter was debated, and it was left to parliaments of the world to look into it and look at the UN resolutions and see whether it is possible in future to allow refugees to be able to vote in the countries that they live in. And Honorable Speaker, this year's conference also, you will note, Honorable Speaker, that most of the members of this delegation were fairly new members. They had not attended the IPU conference before. And there was a very near misstep. And that brings now the issue of the need of institutional memory in such international fora. Because during one of the sessions, Honorable Speaker, there was a heated debate on the consequences of the U.S. declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and the U.S. moving its embassy to Jerusalem. And there was a very, very heated debate in the plenary, and one of the we were caught up in the debate as members of the delegation, and as we were about to take a vote in this very important debate, we were very lucky to have been reminded by the Secretariat that Kenya belongs to the non-aligned status in terms of international diplomacy, and we lost the opportunity to be able to vote in such a very lively motion. But suffice it to say, Honorable Speaker, that the delegation was very ably represented by the members who are present, and the resolutions, I do not want to belabor this House that much, the resolutions are as contained in this report, and I will be highlighting some of the resolutions so that members may have time to look at the report and read it for themselves. The Honorable Speaker, one of the key resolutions that came up from this conference was on this matter that I spoke to earlier, on the consequences of the United States of America Declaration on Jerusalem and the rights of the Palestinian people in Jerusalem in the light of the United Nations Charter and resolutions. The conference, Honorable Speaker, just as a highlight, called on parliamentarians to urge their governments to recognize the state of Palestine along the 1967 borders with Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with UN resolutions. That was a very, very emotive issue, and as I said, this resolution was adopted by a vote. So the Honorable Speaker, without much ado, the recommendations of the Kenyan delegation are that this House notes this report, and therefore this House follow up on the implementation of the declaration and resolution of the 138th IPU Assembly and related meetings. I will ask Honorable Owen Baya to second.
Honorable Baya.
Madam Speaker, I stand to second this motion as this paper as tabled and this report. Madam Speaker, the IPU 138th Assembly of the Inter-parliamentary Union and related meetings held in 22nd to 28th March 2018 was quite an eye-opener. One, it took a lot of time to discuss issues of refugees and migrants, which was actually the theme of this very important meeting that was held in Geneva. It also discussed issues of renewable energy and how to engage the private sector in ensuring that renewable energy in the world is sustainable. Madam Speaker, Kenya as a country benefits immensely from a discussion like this, which is at the global stage. That as we look back as a country, I know as a country we are discovering new energies in terms of oil in Turkana and other places. But the world is moving towards renewable energy. And as you look at the report, you realize that for this country to be sustainable, and part of the SDGs that we have to invest heavily in renewable energy as a country so that we are able to sustain the economy as it were. Madam Speaker, one of the other interesting topics that we discussed at the IPU is the issue of democracy and human rights. As a country, at this time when we were actually in the IPU Conference General Assembly in Geneva, there were many things that were happening in this country, but we thank God that now the handshake has brought this country to a complete new path. We need to look at democracy as something that as a country we benefit from and that our residents continue to benefit and the citizens continue to benefit, and human rights. I think the constitution of this country is very rich at ensuring that human rights is given the maximum support and maximum respect as enshrined in the Constitution. But the Global Compact on regular migration actually looks at human rights from the perspective of migrants and how a country needs to look at refugees. Kenya is actually a host to a lot of refugees. And this conference, therefore, was relevant to Kenya as a country in giving a pedestal for Kenyans to look at how do we continue to treat refugees in this country. You realize that this government has been very clear on its policy on refugees. And I think there's been a push to close the refugee camps that are here, because refugees in this country that are coming to this country have continued to deplete the little resources that we have. But again, human rights calls it upon us as a country to continue to address the problems that are encountered by refugees. But more important, This conference looked at, we need to look at the root causes of migration and refugees, and why refugees move from one country to the other as a way of addressing human rights in the world. You realize that Kenya has had so many refugees from Sudan, from Somalia, and from other countries. But as we receive these refugees and they come into this country, as we treat them, we don't only treat them well, but we need as a country to continue to be the peace superpower within the region to address the causes of refugees. I think Kenya has participated effectively in bringing peace in the Sudan or in South Sudan. This way is actually addressing the resolution of the IPU that we need to look at the root causes of refugees and address them so that we can stop the influx of refugees into nations. We also need to look at why people are migrating from one country to the other and address the root causes of migration so that as a country we feel safe with the little refugees, few refugees that we have and migrants, but we stop countries from making sure that people become refugees. Madam Speaker, in the IPU, one of the things that was of note, just like Honorable Kamkate has noted, is the Forum of Women Parliamentarians. And as Kenyans, I think we were honored that we got one of our own to become a vice president of the Forum of Women Parliamentarians in the IPU. And Honorable Senator Kihika actually was elected through a lot of lobbying to become a member, to become the vice president of the Women Forum. But one of the things that came to our minds during this time, and we realized, is that we have not been a great participant in these great forums as a country because the delegations keep on being changed. Other places, a notable country like South Africa, a country like Namibia, and other African countries have a strong footing in the IPU. Why? Because they have continually sent the same members, and therefore their names are household names there. They are given opportunities to speak and opportunities to move the assembly to make certain resolutions. Coupled with the fact that the East African delegation was not strong, that Kenya was running a lot of things on its own without the backing of the East African countries, then we were not able to get as many seats as other people had. We were not able to move the assembly into adopting certain positions and motions within the assembly. And therefore, I would call the leadership of the two houses to ensure that there's consistency and a permanent delegation so that we can also influence the resolutions that are passed. Interestingly, Madam Speaker, a lot of countries had influence on the floor of the House because they have had members who have been there. They were able to lobby for certain positions because they kind of knew each other within the assembly. But the Kenya delegation was not able to do that because we were completely a new delegation. We had to learn what the IPU was about. We had to learn a lot of things before we could actually push a motion. I want to say a few things about what the mover, Mr. Kamkate, said, Honorable Kamkate said. When it came to the most important motion on the floor of the House, Kenyans, we were at a loss because we did not have a policy that was developed for us first from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that would have guided us in the debate. Two, we were told late that, we were an unaligned nation, and therefore we cannot take a position. And yet other African countries took a vote and said, no, we support, either we oppose Americans' declaration that Jerusalem become the capital of Israel. But I think as a Kenyan delegation, we got information late that, as a Kenyan, we cannot take a position on this matter so that we do not interfere with our foreign policy. But it also calls for this country to develop a foreign policy that sways the African foreign policies. As a country, I think we have come of age. Our economy and everything about this country can actually lead foreign policy in the continent. And that the foreign policy that drives this continent on whether to align its matters on this area or this area, I think Kenya needs to take leadership. And the IPU exposed us that actually we are not a powerhouse in international policies or continental matters as a country. And therefore, I would like to call upon this House and the leadership of the House and the government and especially the Minister of Foreign Affairs to start thinking about becoming the leader in the continent in terms of international foreign policies. But as I say this, I also want to very sincerely thank the Kenyan embassy in Geneva and the Kenyan, especially Dr. Mukisa Kitui, who took his time off and hosted us and talked to us and gave us direction on a lot of foreign international matters. And therefore, I would beg to support and second this report for adoption and discussion and noting in this great House. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Honorable members, I go on to propose a question, which is that this House notes the report of the 138th Assembly of the Inter-parliamentary Union, IPU, and related meetings held in Geneva, Switzerland, on March 22nd to 28th, 2018, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, 24th July, 2018. Honorable Mbarire.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ought to rise to support this report that has been tabled by the Honorable Kamtet, who I presume was the head of delegation from the National Assembly. And let me just say that I too have had the benefit in the past of attending one or two IPU meetings. And let me just add my voice and say that actually I saw a major gap in the way the delegations from other countries participated in the IPU events compared to Kenya. And I'm actually glad that for the first time we are seeing a Kenyan elected into either of the various committees of IPU, because I remember at that time it was very hard to get elected because they elected people they were familiar with. And part of familiarity came out of the fact that other nations would send a permanent delegation to IPU until, the voices of those delegations were heard and they were able to network with the rest of the membership. And as a result, they created a name in the assembly and were able to be recognized and even elected when elections came. So I'm glad that we have the first person who's been elected in the name of Senator Susan Keheka in the Women Committee as a vice president, and I hope that this will truly begin to be the right step in the right step towards ensuring that our foothold in IPU is felt as a nation, and we can be able to even go for bigger positions going forward. Madam Speaker, let me just say that IPU creates a very good global platform for parliamentarians to engage on matters that are relevant or are of importance to the nation and to the world. And therefore, having participated even in the IPU meetings, and I'm sure even you, Madam Speaker, you have done the same, we always go for IPU sessions in the Commission on the Status of Women. But again, we are never really right inside those organizations and those conversations because we just attend, and every time there's a new attendant. So, sorry, Madam Speaker. So I hope that going forward, we'll truly take this matter seriously, have a permanent delegation so that our views can be heard as a nation.
You want to, okay, she's got some, so it's okay.
Where I come from, they say if you start coughing while talking, some people are talking about you somewhere. So I hope the talk is a good one for me. about me. But Madam Speaker, let me just say, I've liked the topics that took place in this particular discussion, this particular assembly. One of them being the strengthening the global regime for migrants and refugees. And as a nation, I do not know how much the delegation spoke about this, because we are one country that has had to deal with refugees over a long time because of conflict within the region. And so we become a very important partner in the region in terms of, refugees and migrants. And it's a matter that we have seen the president talk about even international fora, seeking for support towards Kenya because of the role we play in hosting refugees in Kakuma and other camps in the country. So I want to say that I think that was an important topic that obviously must have been thoroughly debated on. I'm not able to go into the resolutions one by one, but this House should, members should really look at it, and hopefully that the departmental committee that deals with that particular matter can begin to look and see how we can domesticate some of those resolutions to fit into our specific experience as a nation. Madam Speaker, I think also very, very important was, sustaining peace as a vehicle for achieving sustainable development. Obviously, one of the major causes of migration, and especially having refugees, is lack of peace and an enabling environment for people to live meaningful lifestyles that makes people move. And so that too was an important topic that is relevant to us as a nation, Madam Speaker. But more importantly, I think what I really liked was that there was also a topic about renewable energy, which is the thing that we are all talking about as a nation. Earlier on, we were looking at the issue of solar energy. But what I found very interesting is that we are now also recognizing the role of women in renewable energy as a means of enhancing economic empowerment, as well as women's potential, given their key role in producing and using energy in households and communities, particularly in developing countries. And I think we just had this debate earlier when we were looking at the report of the implementation committee, where we have actually thrown away the entire regulations that had been set up around solar energy by ERC. And one of the things that came up was that there was no public participation. And I think time has come whenever we talk about renewable energy, we must appreciate the special role of women in renewable energy, considering that they are a big consumer of the same. And so I hope that going forward also, we'll start to look at these issues. But my concern, having looked at the discussions that took place and the resolutions, is how then do we ensure that once we note this report, we don't just note it, but we also take the resolutions, the important resolutions of these reports, of these delegations that go out, and we spend taxpayers' money to send these delegations to these meetings. How do we ensure that some of these resolutions that we are able to identify with and which fit into our particular situation as a nation are taken up, for example, by the relevant committees? For example, the resolutions on energy should be able to be looked at the Committee of Energy, so that we can see what we can borrow from them, what we can pick from them, and how they can be helpful to our nation going forward. Because I believe there are lots of experiences shared and best practices that end up in these final recommendations. So I hope going forward, we'll not just be picking reports, noting them on the floor, and that's where it ends. Surely, there must be something we can bring back to the country that adds value, because it is a global platform that people are able to exchange ideas and get what other nations are doing, and then we can borrow some of those things and use them here in our country. So with those few remarks, may I thank the chair and the delegation, the committee, the delegation that went to IPU, and really add my voice in saying there's need to make this delegation a permanent delegation, because it doesn't add value that we have not been able to rise to the top in IPU to the point where we are recognized as a nation because of the turnover of delegations that we keep sending over to IPU. At least within the period of 5 years, let's have a permanent delegation that can be able to really add value to that important global platform. With those many remarks, I beg to support.
Well said. I see the member for Buretti. Do you want to contribute? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do rise, Madam Speaker, to support the report. Madam Speaker, from the onset, I just want to say that the report is a good one, Madam Speaker. It's detailed. It actually encompasses everything that members went through when they were in the meeting, in the IPU meeting. Madam Speaker, one thing that caught my eye, Madam Speaker, was on the issue of the stigma faced by HIV and AIDS, people living with HIV and AIDS. Madam Speaker, the Forum of Young Parliamentarians of the IPU went into details in dealing with this. And Madam Speaker, is very critical and strike chord with me that at this modern age, Madam Speaker, it's sad that some people living with HIV and AIDS still face stigma in our society. The issue of HIV/AIDS has been with us for a long period of time, Madam Speaker, and it's surprising that the stigma is still ongoing. I thought it was long overdue, and this issue has been gotten rid of. But you'll appreciate, Madam Speaker, that in some societies, this issue has not been buried. Somebody, Madam Speaker, living with HIV/AIDS does so not by choice, but by circumstances probably brought to them not because they liked it or because they were in control of. And I suppose it's upon us, the society, to empathize with them. It's upon us to realize that having HIV or AIDS is not the end of the world. That with proper care, proper nutrition, life can continue. And I like what I see in the report, Madam Speaker, and I do echo the same and say it was a good job well done to actually highlight these issues, the challenges faced by this minority group of the society, Madam Speaker. As I say, having HIV/AIDS is not the end of the world, and it's not an individual disease. When one of your family members is suffering from the same, Madam Speaker, then it's the entire family that suffers. Secondly, Madam Speaker, there was an issue that the IPU discussed, which is very intriguing, Madam Speaker, on the consequences of the US declaration on Jerusalem and the rights of Palestinian people in Jerusalem in light of the UN Charter and resolution submitted by the delegation of Palestine, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Turkey. Madam Speaker, this is one area that has caught the attention of the entire world currently. That the mere fact that the capital of Israel has been relocated to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv has caused a lot of uproar. But what surprised me, Madam Speaker, is that during the IPU meeting, the Kenyan delegation did not vote because we are part of the members of the non-aligned movement. Madam Speaker, I would have loved to see the stand of the Kenyans when faced with this critical vote on whether they do agree for the capital of Israel to be taken to Jerusalem or to remain in Tel Aviv. Madam Speaker, Jerusalem has special attachment to most of the religions of this world. The Jewish believe that is where the Lord will come in, will land when he comes back to this world. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is a symbol and one of the greatest symbols for the Islam, Madam Speaker. And also the Christians, which the denomination I do belong, believe the same to be the holy place. So we all have a special attachment to Jerusalem, Madam Speaker. But what was intriguing was how many nations, especially the Islamic nation, took the decision, the declaration to have Jerusalem as hosting as having the U.S. declaration Jerusalem as hosting the U.S. embassy. But otherwise, Madam Speaker, it was very intriguing Thirdly, Madam Speaker, the issue of refugees was discussed at length in this meeting. And I want to say, Madam Speaker, the issue of refugees has been with us from time immemorial. The first slaves, Madam Speaker, were taken involuntarily to the USA and South America by the whites. Most of the blacks also was taken to the Middle East to work as slaves, Madam Speaker. But what we are facing currently, Madam Speaker, is economic refugees, migrants, and refugees that are running away from persecution in their countries, Madam Speaker. And I'm happy, Madam Speaker, that the meeting dealt at length at the rights of the refugees. You'll find, Madam Speaker, that most of the refugees have their rights trampled upon in the destination where they arrive. But it's nice, Madam Speaker, that these issues are being highlighted so that the world get to know and the rights of the refugees are respected. Women, Madam Speakers, who are traveling these journeys across Mediterranean into Europe find themselves in a tricky position. They find themselves being made prostitutes along the way. They find themselves being made prostitutes in the final destination, Madam Speaker. But I'm happy, Madam Speaker, that the highlights of these refugees and migrants have been highlighted so that these countries, receiving countries do ensure that the rights of these human beings and their dignity is upheld. Madam Speaker, the European countries currently are not comfortable with accepting refugees or economic migrants in their country. But what the UN and the group discussion that took place in the meeting did was commendable, Madam Speaker, because it actually engaged and ensured that the members from those countries were engaged, and a discussion around those areas was done to ensure that in future these countries also are made to understand that some of these refugees don't travel to these countries not because of choice, but for fear of their lives and persecution in where they're coming from. We have countries, Madam Speaker, such as Germany, that have done a commendable job in receiving refugees going to their countries. We've seen incidents also in Europe, Madam Speaker, of the far-right groups rising up and saying we don't want refugees coming into our backyard. But as I say, Madam Speaker, it was a commendable job that the issue of refugees was dealt with at length so that we bring this issue to the fore and also ensure that these nations that are receiving these refugees do take care of the rights of these refugees. But otherwise, on that note, Madam Speaker, I want to say thanks to the group that traveled, and I also want to echo what Cecily Mbariri said, Honorable Cecily Mbariri, that we also should have some form of continuity, that the groups that travel to this destination, Madam Speaker, these groups also do travel to the next route so that we have some continuity, and also that the interest in it be demonstrated by the members that travel, so that we don't have one member traveling this time tomorrow, the next one another traveling, and they have no interest in particular subject that is going on in this meeting with IPU. On that note, Madam Speaker, I do support, and I have to thank the group that traveled to Geneva for a job well done. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Well said. I see no other interest in contributing to this, apart from the head of delegation. You look like you are really eagerly waiting to reply. So take your chance and move your reply.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In replying, Mheshimiwa Speaker, I just want to say that the IPU, in its nature, is the parliament of parliaments of the world. And just like the seconder has said, it is important that the Republic of Kenya, whenever it sends delegations, must be able to send very strong delegations to world fora like this one. And I'm happy, Honorable Speaker, that the delegation that went on its first attempt were able to get one of its own elected as a vice president of the Women Caucus. And I'm very, very proud of Honorable Kihika for achieving that position of the world. Secondly, Madam Speaker, the issue of the vote on the matter of Jerusalem is still has been touched on by many of the members who spoke on this debate. And it brings to question the viability of the non-aligned movement many years after the end of the Cold War. Perhaps it's time the Republic of Kenya and other nations rethink their position in terms of this movement. Because, Madam Speaker, at that time, it was really very relevant to be either non-aligned or aligned to either of the power blocks. But many years after the end of the Cold War, I think it is time we relook at our foreign policy as a nation so that we are not just a whimper of a nation. Kenya is a very strong country. Kenya must be able to stand up and be counted among the community of nations as a nation that does not duck when the real issues come up that affect human populations. That is a very important matter that needs to be reviewed moving forward. Otherwise, Honorable Speaker, the matter of the refugees has been touched on by the members who spoke also, which was also one of the major agenda of this IPU conference. We do appreciate that we have refugee issues in this country, and it is important also, just as it was discussed in the IPU assembly, to begin looking at the rights of refugees in a more detailed manner, considering their human rights as human beings. Because, Honorable Speaker, it is enough to be removed from your country and to go and live in a foreign country, but it is worse, Madam Speaker, to be disenfranchised twice. That you have been disenfranchised forcefully from the country of origin, and you continue to be disenfranchised in the country that you go to live in, the country that has adopted you. So that's a matter that needs to be discussed moving forward as a matter of principle in terms of addressing the rights of refugees in the world. Otherwise, Honorable Speaker, I will urge you to indulge me that the putting of the question on this motion be postponed according to Standing Order number 53.3. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Very well, Honorable Kamket. We shall go by that standing order to therefore defer the putting of the question to the next time when we will have the motion slotted in the order paper. Next order.
Order number 13, motion, report on a benchmarking visit to the Parliament of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland.
Honorable Deputy Whip.
Madam Speaker, I think we may have to defer this particular motion because the chair of this committee is not available right now.
Very well. The motion stands deferred. Next order.
Order number 14, motion, report on improvement of services and facilities for members.
I believe this would be the same because it's the same chair. So I therefore rule that this motion also stands deferred. Next order.
Order number 15, the Finance Bill, National Assembly Bill number 20 of 2018.
Honorable Deputy Whip.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, the same issue on the motion number 15. Because we have not yet received the report from the committee, and that may be the same case with the subsequent motions.
You mean down to order number 18?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
So in that case then, I therefore rule that we shall have to defer order number 15 on the finance bill, order number 16 on the warehouse receipt system bill, and order number 17 on the urban areas and cities bill, as well as order number 18 on the county government's amendment bill, Senate Bill number 11 of 2017, until such a time when the same will be slotted in the order paper. Order members. Honorable members, the time being 6:30 p.m., this House stands adjourned until Wednesday, the 15th of August 2018 at 9:30 a.m.